and carrying forward the discussion in the portion of the water, land, and noise pollution. And then after that, we shall be endeavoring to enter into the area of climate change. Now, yesterday in our discussions, we discussed about the air pollution in further significant detail, where we discussed about very important concepts as far as UPSC is concerned, because the number of questions asked from that area is quite significant. We discussed about the aspect of the ozone layer, where we discussed about how that ozone hole gets created, how that ozone layer gets created, why that ozone hole is persistent over the poles, but the ozone hole is present in other areas as well. What do we mean by ozone hole? What is the Dobson unit? And what is the Vienna Convention and the Montreal Protocol to Vienna Convention? Then we observed the various different amendments to the Vienna Protocol. That is, start the major amendments, that is starting with the London Amendment, then came the Copenhagen Amendment, then came the Montreal Amendment, and after that you had the Beijing Amendment. But then in all these you had the targets which were updated, and various different other ozone depleting substances which were added to the control list. And eventually we studied the Kigali Amendment. Kigali Amendment of 2016 is again very, very important for your mains examination. And there we discussed that how Kigali Amendment is different in the sense that it does different goal settings for various different countries. And that is why it makes it much more achievable. We discussed about the issues with HFCs, where the hydrofluorocarbons, even though they are not able to deplete the portion of ozone, or they don't have the capacity to cause ozone depletion or create ozone hole, but these hydrofluorocarbons nonetheless have a very high global warming potential. And as a result of that, as a consequence of that, they are warming the climate. That is why the Kigali Amendment helps us to meet the goals of the Paris Agreement as well, because the Paris Agreement talks about limiting the rise of global temperature. So that is something that we discussed. After that, we moved ahead and we furthermore discussed about the Air Act also. The Air Act of 1981, its importance, its relevance. We discussed certain of the important snippets that, for example, we discussed the snippets about the aspect of the noise pollution being covered under the portion of Air Act in itself, right? So the Air Act of 1981, that included the aspect of noise pollution also. Then we discussed about the other governmental initiatives which have been taken in order to combat the pollution of air, the monitoring system, what is SUFFER, the prediction model. We also discussed about AQI, one number, one color, and thereby a better understanding the different pollutants which are covered under AQI. After that, we had initiated the discussion about the portion of water pollution, where we initiated the discussion about the point and the non-point sources of pollution. Then after that, we held a discussion about the issues or the causes of water pollution. How is it that the groundwater gets polluted? What are the various mechanisms by which the river water gets polluted? Why is it that the region of Maharashtra, why is it that the region of Assam is experiencing a high amount of pollution debris or high amount of pollution load in the rivers? And also, we have held a discussion about topics such as oil spills, marine oil spills. What are the various different impacts of marine oil spills? What can be done, from spraying sawdust to basically use of skimmers to usage of oil zapper, oilivorous, to also basically carrying out controlled combustion? These are the various mechanisms to control oil spill. Then we discussed other mechanisms by which the water can be polluted, including the seepage from landfills, etc. Now, here, please understand that this question about the aspect of oil spills, or the topic about the oil spills, was asked in this year's mains examination. You had direct question about the oil spills and its thereby the implications created by these oil spills. So it is from these areas that if you have a clear understanding, if you have a good understanding in the start itself, that will be very helpful, very rewarding. And here again, before I initiate this, and this is my duty to in order to warn you up, that basically many of the candidates I have seen, when they start studying environment ecology, They don't pay much attention into these particular areas of pollution, government initiatives, etc. They straight away jump to the portion of national parks, wildlife sanctuaries, the critically endangered species, and so on. Now, from those topics, hardly you get one question or two questions. And in the prelims, and even the questions that you get are basically so very factual that chances are you might not be able to attempt that. But these are the low hanging fruits. For example, the details of the marine oil spill, right? And the impact thereby. What is that leaching of the chemicals which happens underground? Now, it is these details from which the questions in the mains examination are asked. 10-mark question, 15-mark questions. So always think about the return on investment. If you are spending a lot of energy in learning some of the facts which might not be asked in the examination, or even if there is a very factual question asked in the examination, you might attempt that incorrectly, or you might gain a negative mark. Better to concentrate on the low hanging fruits and secure a good marks in the mains exam. So please be very careful about the approach here also. Okay. Now, when we, when will we do the PYQs? So have we not been discussing the PYQs in the class? We have been discussing the PYQs since the very first session, if I'm not mistaken. Last week also we discussed the PYQs. Then this week also we discussed few of the PYQs. Are we aware of that, or has that skipped the mind? No? Okay. It is, you are aware of that. Fair enough. So please understand, after every topic, if we start discussing the PYQs, it is not that case that you have so many previous year questions coming from the portion of environment, because the environment, the sample size in itself is from 2014, and I won't be picking up the factual questions. For example, the honeybee, orangutan, etc. I won't be picking up those particular questions, because those factual questions, either you know it or you don't know it. For example, if I teach you this time about orangutan, previously, year before that, UPSC had asked a factual question about what is the gestation period for elephants. That what is the time taken for them to basically grow their young ones inside. And so that is absolutely factual. So we won't be chasing that. But here, from environment, is there any question in prelims? Yes, my dear friend, there are around 15 questions which are asked in the prelims, 12 to 15 questions which are asked in the prelims. So many of you, I feel, have not taken a look at a previous year question at all of civil services. Please don't do that disservice to yourself, my dear friends. Take a look what the prelims question looks like, what the question paper looks like. It will give you a panic in the initial days. You need to absorb that panic and then move ahead with the portion of preparation. If you have that kind of a mindset that 1 month before the examination I'll open up the previous year question, that is how I did it in the board exams, that is how I passed in my graduation, that concept doesn't work in civil services. So please don't do that. You don't need to be covering many books, Musharraf. As I already said, that the class PPTs along with the additional reading materials and the current affairs shall be more than sufficient. Okay. Now, we move ahead with the portion of the various different governmental initiatives which have been undertaken in order to basically clean the river. Because when we talk about the freshwater pollution, that is the river pollution, is also a very significant factor of contamination which influences all of us. And it influences us by the methodology or mechanism of bioaccumulation and biomagnification. Now, the rivers, for a long period of time in our country, not very long, but for substantial amount of time in our country, these rivers have been significantly polluted. The level of pollution is very high in these particular rivers, particularly the rivers such as River Ganga, which has a large amount of population, crores of people living in the banks, right from the region of, or right from the area where the river originates to the destination. The river has got large population, large settlements, industries, agricultural setup, all happening on the banks of these rivers. So that is why Ganga has always become, or for a long period of time, Ganga has become kind of like a poster child to indicate river pollution. Now, keeping this thing in mind, the government in 1986 had launched the Ganga Action Plan, and this was to clean the river Ganga. Now, at this point of time, simultaneously, the government was very well aware that it is that open defecation which is being carried out, that people defecating in the open and people defecating near the riverbeds, that is what is adding to the nutrient over contamination of the river. And that is where, in order to control the amount of sewage which is discharged into the river, the government at that point of time had also launched another program, what is referred to as the Total Sanitation Campaign. The Total Sanitation Campaign, or TSC. So this was also launched simultaneously in order to tackle the issue of open defecation. But none of these programs could really pick off. They could not pick themselves up in the form of their execution, right? And as was the case during the late 70s, during the early 80s, and up till early 90s also, execution of the various government projects was not a strong suit that we had. It was only after the mid 90s and late 90s where the government policies began being implemented on the ground and began being executed on the ground. So most of these programs initiated at this point of time were largely on paper. So as you could see from your own experience, that open defecation would be a norm till quite recently. It is only in the recent times, with increased amount of awareness that the public has and the name and the shame associated with open defecation, the problem of open defecation has reduced a bit, but it is still quite significant, and we need to get a hold of it. But then, obviously, in 1986, this did not work significantly. Now, think about the efficacy of the planning at that point of time, how efficient our planning was. Now, this Ganga Action Plan to clean the river Ganga was launched in 1986. It took us 5 years, that is in 1991. The government realized that you cannot clean river Ganga unless and until you clean the tributaries. So that is when Yamuna, Gomti, Damodar, they were added on to the list. Now, Yamuna, being a tributary of river Ganga, is also very significantly polluted, particularly in the region around Delhi. And furthermore, where it comes or where it passes through the habitations and the settlements, that is where the amount of pollution load is very high. Now, Yamuna is one of those rivers where the pollution is carried out quite significantly, not only by the industrial discharge, but also the open discharge of untreated wastewater and sewage. That untreated wastewater and sewage, along with the industrial discharge, is responsible for that horrifying images that you see sometimes where River Yamuna, for example, and this image has done multiple rounds, has become very particular, where you see large froth and foam which builds up on the river, right? And that is basically the industrial contaminants which start building up on the rivers. So that is where the problem of pollution is quite significant in these areas. And this problem of pollution that we see, there we observe that river Yamuna gets polluted by the industrial discharge, by the fecal matter, untreated wastewater. What about river Gomti? River Gomti passes through the major or the large city of Lucknow. So River Gomti, again, up till a few years back, and it was the state governments, the previous state governments have also worked upon it significantly. So over the past 10.5 years or more than that, you have had a kind of a systemic utilization of the cleaning mechanism to clean River Gomti. But River Gomti, and those of you belonging from Lucknow would attest to the fact, was actually one of those areas where you would not venture into the riverside because of the foul stench that would emanate, just like River Yamuna. And there also you had a lot of agricultural waste, agricultural discharge, along with the industrial and the fecal matter. Now, it is a different matter altogether that River Gomti now has got a very clean riverfront which has been built across the banks of River Gomti, and this is that has become a place for tourist attraction now. So Gomti and the cleaning of River Gomti has also come a long way. When we talk about River Damodar, Damodar is a tributary to River Hooghly, and Hooghly is a distributary of River Ganga. Damodar also flows through a Rift Valley system. I'm not writing this up because I feel that you would be aware about these major rivers, right? These particular rivers you would be aware about. So when we talk about Damodar, in the case of River Damodar, you have this region moves through an area of Rift Valley system where you have significant amount of pollutant from the mining waste, mining and industrial waste. For example, River Damodar, where it moves, that is a very coal rich area. There you have the Gondwana quality coal and all that mineral rich area. There you have endless number of coal washeries, etc. Now that basically also provides impediment to River Damodar. And River Damodar is another one of those rivers where sand mining is again a pertinent issue. Now, sand mining, I hope we are aware, is one of those issues where the flow of the river in itself gets hampered. The flow in itself gets stopped. Right? Why? Because you keep out digging the sand and you dump it on the portion that you have dug out, whether you carry it out, but some of the excess you dump in the river channel itself. So the flow of the river gets completely hampered, right? And there in the process of sand mining also you add contaminants. So River Hooghly, which moves through the region of Kolkata, River Hooghly would also be significantly polluted. So that is where the government basically thought about it in 1991, that River Ganga is getting polluted from where? So the perception was that, look, you have Gomti adds pollutants, Yamuna adds pollutant in the middle course of River Ganga, Damodar adds pollutants in the lower course of River Ganga. So let's clean these tributaries, and that is where they were included in basically the Ganga Action Plan. Now, Gomti at my hometown is going to be extinct, a lot of grass, silt, etc. So Gomti also suffers from the same issue of sand mining. The sand mining mafias, they are, for example, River Luni is coming to a kind of an abrupt end in the region of Rajasthan because of the sand mining mafias, which are very, very strong. So that happens where when you carry out significant and unsustainable amount of sand mining, the natural flow of the river is completely taken out of the equation. In 1995, National River Conservation Plan was then launched. Then National Ganga River Basin Authority was constituted under the Environment Act of 1986 in 2009 to strengthen the National River Conservation Plan. Okay, so here overall you can see that there is a kind of multiple different actions taken place after many, many years, but then not a substantial progress had been made, because you cannot end up cleaning the waste of the river and expect the river to be clean at the end of it. It cannot happen. You need to tap and control the source of pollution, the point of pollution. Unless and until you bring that under control, you can never bring the overall pollution levels down. Okay, so that is where in 2009 you had a kind of a specified authority, National Ganga River Basin Authority, which was established. Furthermore, in 2011 you had the establishment of the National Mission for Clean Ganga. So think about it. Multiple times rechristening of the same government scheme has taken place. The same government scheme has been renamed multiple times. For example, this total sanitation campaign eventually would end up becoming Nirbal Bharat. Then it was named differently under the previous regime. Then it was named as Swachh Bharat Abhiyan under the present regime. So the naming and the renaming of the government policies have always been a trend whenever any government is in power. So some of the major objectives of the National Mission for Clean Ganga are what? So it incorporates rehabilitating and boosting the existing sewage treatment plants. STPs here indicate sewage treatment plants. Sewage treatment plants. Okay. So those sewage treatment plants, they are very, very essential in order to control the kind of wastewater that you are simply pushing into the river. That needs to be brought under control. And instant short-term steps to curb pollution at exit points on the riverfront in order to check the inflow of sewage. This was a major objective. Okay. Now, these STPs, they have never been built in large scale and in large numbers across the rivers. That is why the problem of pollution in the rivers is still persistent. Right? You might have a new reinvigorated action where you start using dredgers and excavators to clean the river. But again, that sewage is continuing to come into place. So that is why one needs to install large number of these STPs so as to ensure that the untreated wastewater does not go into the river, to maintain the continuity of the water flow without changing the natural season variations. This is what is also referred to as the e-flow of the river or the ecological flow. E-flow or ecological flow. Now, when we say ecological flow, means we are talking about the natural flow of the river. If the natural flow of the river that is inhibited, if that, let's suppose, comes to a standstill or comes to a halt, comes to a stop, the river is unable to flow naturally, then in that situation, you come across a scenario where, for example, if you talk about a river, then not only the amount of pollution or the pollutant starts accumulating in an area, but also the biodiversity, the aquatic biodiversity in these rivers, that gets impacted. If the river is able to flow naturally well, you have its own natural systems taking care of the contaminants also flowing along with that. But let's suppose you hinder that. Let's suppose you build a type of a barrage or a kind of a dam like structure. So there also the property of the river will be hampered because lot of water storage will happen. Stagnating water conditions or stagnant water conditions will be found or will be observed to be accumulated in an area. So that is where the continuity of water flow without changing the natural season variation, to restore and maintain the surface flow and the groundwater, where if the groundwater is also of a significant amount of depth, etc., that also helps in maintaining the health of the river flow, to regenerate and maintain the natural vegetation of an area, because the natural vegetation across the river banks also in a way ensures that lot of soil and sedimentation, excess amount of sedimentation pollution does not happen. This ensures that pollution due to excessive sedimentation doesn't take place. Then to conserve and to regenerate the aquatic biodiversity as well as the riparian biodiversity that is around the river banks, also the biodiversity needs to be maintained in order to ensure that the natural, physical, unnatural biological processes, they kick in. And one of the more important ones was to allow participation of the public in the process of protection, rejuvenation, and management of the river. Now, why is this important? Is because whenever you talk about any government policy, any government program, unless and until you can ensure public participation, unless and until you are able to ensure mass public involvement and public enthusiasm, that project will never succeed. Never. Right? Because if the public for whom you are carrying out these projects, if they are not satisfied, if they are not a part of it, then someone else will carry on polluting that region. Right? For example, why is it that Swachh Bharat Abhiyan is comparatively much more successful as compared to the total sanitation campaign? Because when you had that total sanitation campaign, which was launched way back in 1986, that awareness raising amongst the public was not done at that point of time. Obviously, you had hindrances in communication. You had various obstacles. Now you have the power of internet where you can communicate throughout the country any particular message you can convey to the country in a very short time window. But that was not the case around 30, 40 years back. That is why you will find that in those days, many of the government programs, they were launched with the same ideals that you have the government programs being launched nowadays. But they met with a kind of a limited success because, again, lack of public participation. Now, eventually, you had in 2016 a kind of a unified or a central authority which was built, which was actually made up, and that was the National Ganga Council. That was created in 2016. Now, this National Ganga Council takes care of everything associated with the cleaning of River Ganga. So here, it is full name is National Council for Rejuvenation, Protection, and Management of River Ganga. It was formed under the River Ganga Authority's order in 2016. Okay, so not a statutory body. Now, this order dissolved the earlier formed National Ganga River Basin Authority. Remember, National Ganga River Basin Authority was formed in 2009. New government came to power. They formed another particular organization and replaced it with the National Ganga Council. Now, the purpose of it and the responsibility is basically the prevention of pollution and rejuvenation of the River Ganga, including the tributaries. Now we know better. Now we do know that in cleaning of the tributaries is required if you want to maintain a cleaner river. So that is why cleaning of tributaries, and its jurisdiction extends to all the various different states through which River Ganga flows through. Okay, so River Ganga and its tributaries, whichever states that they flow through, the entire Ganga River basin, whichever region they flow through, all those states come under the jurisdiction of this. Now, here you will observe that the objectives of National Mission for Clean Ganga are almost similar. That is something that we study. This is the National Mission for Clean Ganga. These are the objectives that we basically study. Okay, now, after this, we come to the portion of marine pollution. How can river e-flow of river remain intact if it is meandering with respect to time? See, ecological flow does not mean you ensure the river moves in a very fast pace. What does ecological flow tell you? That the natural flow. So you will have seasonal variations. You will have the river following its own path, having lesser water during certain seasons where it will meander, having greater water flow during the rainy season where there will be a kind of a straightening formation of water-filled Oxbow Lake area, etc. So that is something that you will observe. That is something that you will experience, right? So you have to maintain that. So that natural flow of the river should not be hindered. Okay, natural flow does not mean that you ensure that throughout the year you have very high amount of water flow. No, that is not natural flow. Okay, Sunil, second point in this NMCG, that is about natural flow. So maintaining the flow of the river, unhindered flow of the river, where by various different construction activities, for example, or excessive sedimentation which is happening in an area, you do not observe the river to be stifling, the river flow to reduce. That should not happen. Okay, so just to ensure that if there is a seasonal variation, so be it. But the processes of sedimentation, pollution, construction, etc., they should not hinder the natural cycle that a river goes through. Okay. Now, after this, we come to the portion of marine pollution. And when we say marine pollution, we are simply, in simplistic terms, sedimentary point is not getting. I hope we are aware that excessive amount of sedimentation is also a source of pollution. Yesterday also we had talked about it. Excessive amount of sedimentation, where you have suspended particles settling out of water, that also warms up water, decreases the depth of the water source, deposits toxins, and this is a result of farming and livestock operations, logging, flooding, runoff, dams, all of that. So what happens if a river is basically moving here? If a river is moving here, and let's suppose here you don't have any vegetation, here you have, let's suppose, some of the vegetation. And in this area, you have carried out massive amount of deforestation. So you have barren land in this particular area, let's suppose, an extremely and quite significantly barren land which is in persistence, right? Now here, if it starts to rain, let's suppose, so all that sediment or topsoil will be carried off by the by the rainwater, and it will be dumped eventually where? In the portion of the river itself, the river bed. So when you have, let's suppose the river channel, if you look at the cross section of it, if the river channel is like this, and then suddenly you have the dumping of sediments in this area, obviously the flow pattern will change. The river might be deviating a bit like this, or the river might even cut down this particular stream bank, erosion might happen. So that is where sedimentation can alter the flow and can also cause pollution of the river water. I hope that is understood. Why don't government restrict it to the people to dump dead bodies ash into the river? Okay. So basically, Shruti, it is not that ash which is the, think about it. If let's suppose you talk about air pollution, I'll tell you the contribution of the ash which is dumped. It is, in fact, more harmful is the partially unburned dead bodies which are thrown into the river. Partially burned dead bodies which are thrown rather than the ash. So think about it. If you tell people not to throw ash, and that is basically associated with a cultural thing. It is a cultural reverence, a kind of a cultural attribute and a traditional attribute that the region has followed for thousands of years now. So you cannot tell people that please don't dump that ash. And ash and its contribution to pollution is so very less. Imagine if you are in Delhi and you are talking about controlling air pollution, you ask people that stop smoking and the air will be clean. So obviously in Delhi, smoking, people who are smoking, think about it, how much would they be contributing to the pollution? So air is already polluted by a lot of other factors. Similarly, river Ganga, if you control the fecal matter, the sewage, the wastewater, the industrial discharge, sedimentation, if you control these things, then basically, and the unburned dead bodies, which are many of the times dumped into the river, you will be tackling about 99.99% of the pollution, right? Ash, anyways, is a kind of a very light substance which is carried out by the river in itself. Okay. Yes, and you had you basically had okay, I won't go into that particular controversial part. Same case of the sedimentation occur in River Kosi. Yes, Anuranjan, that is correct. And recently, the element tantalum has been found in the river Satluj of Punjab. How it was reached into the river due to, no, tantalum is basically, it is expected that it is the source of river Satluj, or the river Satluj as it moves through the Rocky Mountains and the hillsides. It might have accumulated some of that. That is one of the theories. The other theory is also of the industrial discharge, but more plausible one is that it might have accumulated it in its flow. Okay, right. And we will be able to success in cleaning all rivers in India as same as like in Switzerland. Better than Switzerland, Singapore is a model that is much more similar to ours, where Singapore also has a large population residing on the river banks. And Singapore in the 1960s, 70s basically had the river pollution at the same level as River Yamuna. But then the only difference in Singapore and India is they can enforce very harsh laws. Whereas in India, you cannot enforce laws. There is a difficulty in that. There's a problem in that, right? The penalty imposed, etc., are not followable. For example, if you go to Singapore, you dump a kind of a, let's suppose, a plastic glass that you are carrying, you dump it somewhere. They might put you in jail. They might incarcerate you for a long time, and they might charge you a fine or a penalty of close to around $10,000, paying which will include a lot of your fortune given out, right? And it is not like here where you have a fine of rupees 10,000. So better to give the cop rupees 500 so that I am safe. So that kind of thing doesn't happen. So that is why they are able to control that. Switzerland is a different matter altogether because of the climatic conditions there. You don't have that much amount of sand particles, dust particles, etc., which are added to the river. So naturally, the river is cleaner. For example, even in India, you go to the hilly areas, you go to Jammu Kashmir, you go to the region of Himachal Pradesh, you go to the region of Uttarakhand, you go to the region of Sikkim for that matter. The river won't be polluted. The river is much cleaner. It is in the plain areas where we are polluting that. Switzerland is the region where you have those hills, the alpine region, and that too, for example, in the region around Lausanne, etc., the population is so sparsely present that you won't have that much amount of pollution anyways. Okay. Now, does pilgrimage visit also contribute? A little bit, yes, it does. Vivek, pilgrimage also carries out that amount of pollution. But then we have larger concerns at hand when it comes to river pollution. River pollution, see, these things are highlighted. Why? Because at the same time in pilgrimage, you have that large congregation which carries out, maybe they basically uh, end up dumping certain materials, or they end up basically devoting certain materials depending upon the belief. That is why it is always in attention. But Ganga is not polluted. If you talk about the main cause of pollution of river Ganga, it is not chiefly polluted because of these factors. Had that been the case, for example, river Mithi, which moves through Mumbai, there nobody carries out pilgrimage. There barely anybody will go on to put the ashes. Why is river Mithi so polluted? Why is river Mahanadi polluted? Why is river Damodar polluted? Right? So it is not only about, so these things, they are basically highlighted quite significantly that this is the source of pollution. A Kumbh Mela that you conduct, that is the source of pollution. But that is a very temporary phenomena. Rivers are a large water body that we are able to pollute by consistently putting out untreated fecal matter. For example, Yamuna, river Yamuna in Delhi. Now, there, how many religious congregations take place? For example, you had the Chhat Puja, which is conducted with great pomp and show at the banks of River Yamuna every year. And look at the scenes, which are so very horrifying, where you will observe that the entire river has turned frothy with the amount of waste that it is carrying, but still people take a dip in that. So I'm sure it is the people who are suffering from the pollution rather than the river suffering from the people taking a dip, right? So it works in different manner when it comes to the river pollution. Okay. Now, after that, we come to the area of marine pollution. Now, when we talk about marine pollution, we are talking about the pollution of the marine areas, the pollution of the oceanic regions. Okay. So that is where in the oceans and the seas, basically, there we have been dumping the solid waste, including plastic waste, etc., for a very long period of time. Now, over a period of time, many of these wastes, carried by the oceanic circulations, carried by the ocean currents, they have begun being accumulated in certain areas in large numbers. They have started getting accumulated. Now, these plastics which are present in the oceans, for example, plastic dumping is one of the, or plastic pollution is one of the major problems here. Now, these plastics which get dumped, now exposed to sun, exposed to the salty nature or the saline nature of the water, sometimes these plastics, they disintegrate into small parts, what we refer to as microbeads, for example, right? Microbeads. And these microbeads then basically pass on into the through the food chain, through the respiratory tract of the marine species also. So basically, there also you have contamination which is carried out, and the marine food chain and the marine ecosystem gets impacted by this. Okay. The pollution of the marine environment is of various different types, as we'll take a look into, but this is the definition aspect of it. So, the introduction by man, directly or indirectly, of substance or energy to the marine environment, resulting in deleterious effects such as hazards to human health, hindrance to marine activities, impairment of the quality of seawater for various uses, and reduction of amenities. That is basically the aspect of marine pollution. Now, marine pollution overall is of different types. You have eutrophication, acidification, toxins, plastics, underwater noise. All of them, they fall in the category of marine pollution. When we talk about eutrophication, this is basically overloading width of marine areas with nutrients. Okay, overloading of marine areas with various different nutrients. And nutrients here, not in the positive aspect, it can be basically nitrates, phosphates, all that, potash, etc. So that gets dumped into the marine areas. Now, this is carried out again because of industrial discharge, because of sometimes mining waste, because of also agricultural runoff near the marine areas. Sometimes you also have the river carrying so much amount of pollution that it dumps it into the water body also. But understand, eutrophication can be carried out both by us humans and by natural causes also. Eutrophication can happen. Okay, can happen because of, can be caused by both human and naturally also. I think we have discussed this earlier as well in the second or the third class itself, where we discussed about it that when we talk about eutrophication, eutrophication of the marine waters has been responsible for one of the mass extinctions which happened. When life was largely concentrated around the water bodies and the oceans, you did not have much of a life over land. But then you had the plants which had started growing. And every few hundred million years, the planet has witnessed a phase of very excessive amount of rainfall, very high amount of rainfall falling in an area. The planet has gone through that previously also. So when we talk about the marine environment, so previously what has happened hundreds of millions years back, when life was still germinating, when life was still evolving, you had the massive predators in the marine waters which had come into existence, the ancestors of sharks, right? The modern day sharks were actually the prey to those predators. Now, you suddenly had a phase of excessive rainfall where that rainfall carried all the various nutrients from the soil, from the land areas, from the plant growth, the plant waste matter, and they dumped it into the nearby shallow seas everywhere. Everywhere across the world, in the shallower regions, in the continental shelf areas, you had the dumping of that. Natural factors, obviously. You did not have mankind did not come onto the planet for many hundreds of million years later. But when you had this dumping of these nutrients into the marine waters, immediately after that, you had the event or the trigger event of a harmful algal bloom. And that harmful algal bloom, as it progressed, right? So basically, you had the water in the marine areas turning hypoxic. And the entire marine region, especially in the shallower waters, that became devoid of life. You had large dead zones, many large species, and larger species require more amount of dissolved oxygen. So if you deny them the availability of oxygen, they will immediately start dying. So many of the large species, they died during that period of time. In fact, it is said that it was during that time that you had the benthic species, the benthos who could live in the deeper waters, they would survive. And it was during that time when few of the species of certain kinds of fishes, they started becoming amphibians. And this was the rise of the age of amphibians, which later on you had the specialization as anthropods and reptilian species came into existence, where few of the species they started taking to the land in order to escape the toxic waters that the oceans of the world had become. So few of them they started venturing out over to the land areas, and that is how the evolution of the reptilian species happened, which would later on, many hundred million years later, would actually the world would observe these reptilian species eventually would dominate the entire world. right? And the most dominant of the reptilian species basically evolved from the reptilian species were the dinosaurs. Had that asteroid impact not happened, you might not have the humans in existence as of now, or if the humans would have been in existence, basically they would have been running around searching for shelter in the age of the giants. So that is how basically this eutrophication has happened previously also by natural factors also, right? Now this leads to the triggering of harmful algal bloom. Triggers harmful algal bloom. Okay. So eutrophication is the, what is eutrophication? Eutrophication the growth of algae? No. Eutrophication leads to the growth of algae. Eutrophication is when you dump excess nutrients. That is the process of eutrophication. Okay. And then basically that leads to a harmful algal bloom. So they are different. Okay. And then we have acidification of the marine waters also. Now, acidification, ocean acidification is another important topic that we will be dealing in significantly greater detail in the next module. But the oceanic waters across the world, they are turning out to be slightly acidic. The pH value of the oceans of the world is decreasing. And this is happening mostly because of excess amount of carbon dioxide that the oceans are absorbing. And why is that happening? Because of the greenhouse gases that we release into the atmosphere. So acidification is what refers to the reduction, sharp reduction in the pH value of the oceanic water okay, a significantly sharp reduction in the pH value of the oceanic water. And that happens why? Due to, I'll give you the detailed explanation of it. We will deal with it again. The impact on marine life, we'll discuss it in detail when we talk about climate change again. So here, due to excessive CO2 being absorbed by the marine waters. Having said that, when we talk about the pH value of the oceanic water, even today, and many of you trip on this particular fact, so get it very clear. Even today, the pH value of the oceanic water is close to around 8.1. Okay, it is still alkaline. Please don't start thinking because ocean acidification is used in so many media reports, in so many articles, that the perception which is building up is that ocean waters are acidic. No, it is still alkaline. But the pH is reducing at an alarming rate, at a rate which the oceans have never witnessed before. Now, the oceans have experienced various different types of tumult. For example, 90 to 95 million years ago, we have discussed about this also. 90 to 95 million years ago, you had a phase of a significant volcanic eruption happening almost everywhere underneath these oceans, right? And that managed to deplete the oxygen in the oceans, fill that ocean with carbon dioxide. Ocean waters turned acidic. Previously also, you had the phase around many millions of years back also where the oceanic waters turned acidic, leading to mass die-offs. So this has happened previously also. The planet has gone through this multiple different period of times, and whenever the planet goes through these phases, there is extinction. At the same time, there is speciation, right? Speciation. new species come into existence. Many of the species, they evolve, they adapt to the surroundings, and they evolve. They learn to live, they learn to survive. The survivors come into existence, and you have modifications of the existing species. So this has happened previously. The only difference this time is the rate at which it is happening. The rate at which it is happening means that many of the species are unable to adapt to that sudden change. If this would have happened over a spread out period, then many of the species would have been able to adapt slowly and steadily over the passage of many generations. They would have learned to live with that acidified water. But now, within a matter of few couple of hundred of years, this issue has significantly amplified. And that is where the acidification is an issue. It is the rate of acidification which is an issue. Now, then toxins are basically discharged from the shipping industry, from the industrial waste, right? From various different accidents which happen. So that discharges these toxins. So when we talk about toxins, so due to solid waste dumping, then shipping industry, then after that industrial discharge, then after that coastal pollution. Across the coastal areas, the amount of pollution, the pollution load which is basically thrown into the river, all of that is very, very high. So that basically is leading to the various amount of, or the increased amount of pollution. Then you have plastics. The plastics which are basically dumped. Yes. So plastics basically are one of the inventions that mankind has come up with, and we are able to stifle the natural conditions of planet Earth significantly successfully with the help of these plastics. As I told you, these plastics, they do not degrade easily. They continue to persist in the ecosystem for a long period of time. These plastics, many of the times, they get broken into basically microbeads, microplastics, and then they are ingested by the marine organisms. They basically get trapped in the marine organisms. They also, due to bioaccumulation, many of the marine organisms, they end up dying. You had the sad events and the sad cases where you had large sharks, and even in a couple of cases, you had a couple of whale and the organisms of species of whale who basically died and were washed up ashore. It was found out that their body was full, the internal digestive system was so full of plastic that it caused a blockage and the eventual death of it, right? So that is where the plastic waste is causing a lot of damage. While you go out, let's suppose when you go out on a cruise liner, you are moving, let's suppose, from Chennai to Andaman, for example. You don't think twice before throwing a cup or a plastic cup or a plastic straw into water. You don't even think twice. But for many of the marine species, over a period of hundreds and thousands and millions of years, they have evolved in such a manner that they see this as a kind of a food source. They try to pluck it out, they try to eat it up. They don't know what is plastic, do they? So that is when it impacts them. Okay. Then you have underwater noise. That is a very significant source of pollution. So, for example, when you have offshore oil drilling platforms, oil drilling platforms, right? For example, you have ships and submarines. All of them, they create a lot of noise, underwater noise. And that noise is very significantly detrimental for many of the marine organisms. For example, take the case of whales, right? Now, the whale and different species of whales, they have been known to be communicating with each other for hundreds of kilometers, when they are hundreds of kilometers away, with the help of the sound that they emanate. I hope we are aware that whales, they are very communicative species. The species of whales, be it the beluga, be it the orcas, be it the humpback, all the various, even the blue whale, all of them are very, very communicative. They communicate with each other over very large distances with the sound that they emanate. And that sound is significantly louder. It is not a kind of a feeble sound that only the machines can detect. You can hear that sound. It is so very loud. And then even dolphins, for that matter, they communicate with that sound. And they, in the case of dolphins, they navigate by echolocation, where they emanate sound from their body, and that sound, after hitting the various barriers, get reflected back. They detect that, and accordingly they find their way through the obstacles. Now, in that situation, if let's suppose there is a ship which is moving or a submarine which is moving, now the rotor blades, they always create, the engines which are operating, they always create a lot of noise, and that noise is detrimental. It basically, that noise many of the times distracts these species to come near the coastal areas, near the shallow regions where they can't get out of, and that leads to untimely large deaths that you find. Okay, now that is basically, oil spill is a type of marine pollution. Yes, Prem, yesterday we talked about oil spill in detail. So that is a kind of a marine pollution. Okay, and then after that, we talk about the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. So, the coastal waste dumping which has been happening from the various coastline of the Pacific area. Now, as I told you, the oceanic circulation, with the help of the various different oceanic currents, etc., thermohaline circulation, the ocean current formation. Now, all that waste has started to accumulate in certain portions. Right. Now, this is a very large patch. It is not a small area like your municipal waste dumping ground. We are talking about very large areas. For example, if you put all the solid waste or the Great Pacific Garbage Patch, now its size has reduced quite considerably because of the cleaning efforts which have been carried out. But then the size of it is almost equivalent to the size of the country of Spain. So think about it, right? How big this garbage patch has been. Now, this particular garbage patch is largely created due to coastal dumping and also marine waste. So, in the coastline, you dump the solid waste. Let's suppose from here you dump the solid waste. From here also, let's suppose you dump the solid waste. And then that solid waste gets basically circulated. Okay, and it starts getting accumulated in certain areas. It starts and keeps on getting accumulated in certain areas, and then it becomes a issue, a nuisance for the marine species of the region. So it is a collection of marine debris in the North Pacific Ocean. Marine debris is basically the litter that ends up in oceans and seas and other large bodies of the water. And it is also known as Pacific Trash Vortex because of the circular motion and the circular accumulation. It spans water from the west coast of North America all the way to the region of Japan. Now, the patch is actually comprised of the Western Garbage Patch located near Japan, Eastern Garbage Patch, and so on, right? So these areas of spinning debris, where the debris basically is getting accumulated, and the ocean currents, the ocean gyres which are there, they keep on accumulating that debris. So it is a kind of a spinning motion, very slow spin that you observe. So they are located a few hundred kilometers to the north of Hawaiian region. Now, then this pollution of the ocean water ends up creating dead zones or hypoxic waters. Now, what do we mean by dead zone? So, dead zone is a common term for hypoxia, where you have a very reduced level of oxygen, dissolved oxygen in the water. We do know that dissolved oxygen is essential in order to carry out respiration, right? Respiration of the species cannot be carried out unless and until you have enough amount of dissolved oxygen in the water. So, if the level of dissolved oxygen starts coming down, that is when you will observe that the species are unable to survive. Many of the cases, we have witnessed horrific events where suddenly in a one place you have hundreds and thousands of dead fishes suddenly floating on top of water. So that is because of the creation and the existence of these dead zones. So areas with very low oxygen conditions, known as hypoxia, have dissolved oxygen concentration of just 2 milligram per liter or even lesser. So those are your dead zones. Now, across the world, generally, dead zones you will find where? Mostly across the coastal areas, near the coastlines, or where the contaminant is circulated by the oceanic circulation. That is where you'll find the presence of a lot of these dead zones. Okay, so generally found across the coastal areas and sometimes it spreads over a larger area carried by ocean circulations. Okay, now how is it that water gets depleted out of oxygen? Are we aware of that? How is it that these dead zones are created? We have discussed that. Basically, when you add on contaminants and pollutants into the water, be it toxins, nutrients, anything, eventually those contaminants. Why coastal areas? Apply your logic, Shalu. Why do you think coastal areas will be the regions where you will have a lot of these dead zones? Think about it. What can be the answer? I will give you the answer, but before that, I want you to apply your mind. Yes, Abhijit Femina correct. Ravi correct. Yes, all of you are correct. Good. So basically, when we talk about the marine regions or any kind of water pollution, what do you have? You basically have the situation where if you dump some amount of waste, if you dump some amount of garbage, it can trigger a kind of a decomposition process in that area many of the times. That decomposition process is triggered, right? So when that decomposition process is triggered, the microorganisms which are trying to break it down, the microorganisms which are trying to work upon it, they consume the oxygen in the water. Eventually, those microorganisms will also die. But then, by that period of time, they would have consumed all the oxygen in that water in that area. So that is where, what do you find? You will find a situation where the water in itself is drained out of all the oxygen. Why in coastal areas? Because obviously, that is the source of pollution. In the center of the Pacific, that won't be the source of pollution. But for example, in the coastal areas, you will have the industrial discharge, you will have the agricultural runoff, you will have the surface runoff. All of that will carry out the case of sometimes eutrophication, harmful algal bloom. All of that create dead zones. Very good. Almost all of you in this case are correct. Kumari, recently, mass fish kills are in much news, unfortunately, in lakes near the cities of Bangalore. Not recently, my dear friend. Open up the newspaper 5 years back. Open up the newspaper 6 years back. You have areas in Bangalore, for example, the Belandur Lake, which is always known for the mass fish kills. So that is basically the harmful algal bloom and the process of eutrophication, which leads to algal bloom. And that creates the hypoxic waters eventually. Yes. Right? No accountability in seas. Yes, that is true. So that is basically the aspect of these dead zones. Overall, if you find it, where is it that you have these dead zones? So observe this mostly across the coastlines of the world. Mostly across the coastal centers. Why? Because the coastal centers are the sources of pollution. Right? Here, the coastal centers overall are sources of pollution. Can boats float in dead zone? What do you think? What does your logic tell you? That will the boats, if they come over to the area where the oxygen is less, will the boats sink? No, the boats will always be able to float very naturally. Now, Understand, many of the times underwater volcanic events in a certain area might also create a remote region of dead zone, where in a particular area you don't have that much amount of oxygen level because there has been underwater volcanic event or something like that. Eutrophication can always lead to the creation of dead zone. Here in northern Indian Ocean, you observe the existence of a kind of a dead zone both in Arabian Sea and Bay of Bengal. It was actually, Arabian Sea still is not suffering that much as compared to Bay of Bengal, because in Bay of Bengal so many large rivers of South Asia, they come into that area and they are polluted also. So that is why you have excessive amount of sedimentation creating a kind of algal bloom in that area in certain parts. So also waste dumping is also there. So that also creates a lack of significant oceanic circulation. So these are the factors which influence the dead zone. For example, this region that you see. Now this region, it is very well known that this entire area of Eastern Pacific, it sometimes, when you have the excessive cold waters present here, the or excessive warm waters which present here, so in whichever area there is excessive amount of heating, where the sea surface temperature rises beyond the tolerable limit, there also you have creation of dead zone. So when you have the warmer waters which are present here, you don't have any much of a life present. But as soon as the colder waters come, that is during the Walker circulation and La Nina events, when colder waters come here, the oceanic water starts turning slightly greenish because of the sudden growth of planktons. And then you have so many species taking care of it. But if these planktons overpopulate this area, then again you can have the existence of dead zones in the region. Okay, so dead zones can be created because of causes. Causes: dumping of waste, how dumping of waste will create a dead zone. First of all, it will trigger decomposition. Secondly, it will also end up creating a kind of a barrier for the air water exchange, because we do know that oceanic water through natural mechanisms exchanges oxygen with the atmosphere. So if you have waste on top of them, obviously that natural exchange will be hampered. Then after that, you have the condition of basically eutrophication, excessive heating or marine heat waves as they are known as. Okay, all of these basically end up creating dead zones. Algal bloom, here you can talk about plastic waste. One of that very dangerous, yes, is oil spill. Oil spill, if it has happened in an area, that region will take a very, very long time to recover. That region, for many generations to come, the species in that, for the generations of those species, not your and mine generation, the generation of many of these species, they still will not repopulate an area where there has been a significant oil spill. And remember the aspect of the bunker fuel that I talked about. If that gets deposited on the base, that is when the entire, especially the plant system, the aquatic and the marine plant system, that will get hampered. And that is where the production of oxygen, for example, that does not happen. Okay, so this is basically the existence and the creation of these dead zones and the regions where you'll find the presence of these dead zones. Now then we come to, again, a kind of a pollution that we are very well versed with, and that is the case of the land pollution. Land pollution, pollution of the land, right? Now here also you have a classification as soil pollution, and then you have land pollution. Soil pollution, and then you have the case of land pollution also. Okay. Now, what are these? So when we talk about soil pollution, here the contaminant load is present only in the top layer of the soil. That is what is getting polluted. But when we talk about, that is soil pollution. But when we talk about land pollution, that is where even into the depth of the land, the pollution level spreads over. That is what is known as land pollution. So where the pollutant load goes across to the depth also. Okay, so soil pollution is to the top, the superficial, and the land pollution ends up influencing the lower regions also. So here, physical or chemical alteration to land causing land use change, addition of foreign elements, etc. Now majorly cause due to dumping and improper disposal of industrial and domestic waste along with semi-solid waste coming from agriculture and so on. So this basically pollutes the land. Now you would be knowing about the land pollution. Basically you would have witnessed it from your very young days, from your childhood days. So I'm sure this is not a kind of a particular new concept for you. You would be well versed with, you would have seen your surroundings, that how in any open land that we find, we dump the waste from batteries to acids to anything that we can find, thermocol, paper, organic waste, food residue, everything we dump in the same area. Now many of the times, owing to the heat and the exposure level of the heat, you have some of the chemicals which start leaching underground, and they will basically contaminate the soil and even the subsoil region. So even if, let's suppose, tomorrow you manage to, or the municipality of your region manages to remove the waste dumped which on the ground, the subsoil will be so contaminated with toxins, with contaminants, that it won't be able to support plant species or animal species for a very long period of time. Right. So that is what is the concept of land pollution. So land pollution is a degradation of the earth's land surfaces, both above and below the ground level. Whereas when we talk about soil pollution, pollution of the topmost layer of earth or contamination of soil with anomalous concentration of toxic substances, basically it is the top layer when gets polluted. That is the case of soil pollution. Now, what are the various different causes? When we talk about the causes of land or soil pollution, what are the causes which lead to land or soil pollution? One is the agricultural activities. Now, agricultural activities, they do utilize pesticides, herbicides, weedicides, fertilizers. All of them are utilized, right? So when you have all these agricultural activities which are being carried out, there, slowly and steadily, these chemicals which keep on getting dumped onto the ground, onto the surface, that basically carries out the amount of pollution. So we you have various different types of herbicides, insecticides, fungicides, pesticides. All of them, they will continue to pollute the land surface. Okay, so agricultural activities, they are a major cause of land pollution. Then after that, mining and extraction activities also, they will pollute the land, and they will contaminate the land with mercury, arsenic, lead, antimony, cadmium. Look at the heavy contaminants that they give rise to. Okay, so mining activities, how will they pollute the land is basically, as you know, and as we have talked about it yesterday also, that whenever you carry out the process of mining, you simply do not, it is not as if there is gold kept somewhere and you just have to reach that region like you see in the cartoons in your childhood days. And that is the perception which matures as you go up. Sadly, that is the situation where the perception is that there would be gold or coal kept somewhere. Simply you have to reach that region, extract it, send it back. No. When you carry out the process of mining, the ore which is there consists of lot of impurities. Majority of that ore consists of impurities. You might have traces of few of the minerals that you want to extract. Now, if you want to extract that mineral, you need to blast the surface many of the times. In mining also, you have different types of mining. You have the open cast mining. Open cast mining is what? When we talk about open cast, what is open cast mining? Open cast mining is what? In this, you have the minerals which are accrued on the surface rocks, right? So if you have a rocky surface like this, let's suppose, if you have a kind of a rocky surface like this, So with the help of the controlled explosion and the explosives, you blast it off. You create a blasting event. And when you blast it off, then you have many of the smaller pieces. As you can see, that you will have many of the debris, and that you load onto the trucks and you basically send it to the smelting plants, to the processing centers and washeries, and so on. Now, in this process, for example, let's take the case of one of the most prevalent mining areas in our country, or mining activities in our country, is coal mining. Now, those of you who have lived in the coal mining regions of the country, you would be well versed with that. But both those of you who are, let's suppose, not exposed to that reality, let me tell you. For example, in this image, you have, by the open, this is the example of an open cast mining, where on the surface itself, you have the rocks which are blasted off, right? So let's suppose you have this dump of coal type of material. This coal is not utilizable immediately, because this will have so many other adulterants, so many different types of waste matter. You cannot simply start burning it off. So this coal, which consists of sometimes mercury, cadmium, antimony, that is why even in thermal power plants, where you burn coal, the coal based thermal power plants, one of the major contaminant which is released is actually mercury, right? Many of us are not aware about that where does mercury come into the question when we are burning coal and when we are producing electricity, because the rock in itself consists of certain traces of mercury there also. So here, let's suppose it consists of various different contaminants. You load it into a kind of a dump truck or something like that. And then after that, where does the truck go? It goes to the coal washery. Now, what is a coal washery? There, you basically wash off all that you have carried, so that immediate light contaminants and light materials, they are taken away. The dust, absolute dust, is also taken away. Now, that dust might consist of few of the other heavy contaminants, heavy minerals. That is why in the coal mining regions, if you observe the larger vicinity, you will observe that region is woefully short of green areas. Green areas, they start going out of the picture, because eventually this coal dust goes into the air, settles down on the leaves. The leaves, their rate of production reduces. When the rate of production reduces, then the trees, they start dying off. And that is where large barren stretches are created. For example, Chandrapur in Maharashtra. For example, Singrauli. For example, take the case of the mines in the region around Jharkhand. You have the regions such as Dhanbad, etc. Jharia is one of those areas where there is consistent underground fire going on. That region has become barren almost. It will give you a look of a kind of a region which has just emerged out of war, or if it is simply straight, even now going through a kind of a war-like scenario. You will have uh, a dust storm, dust devils rising up from various areas, because the land is absolutely barren in many of the regions. So that is why mining is one of the leading causes of the amount of pollution that you observe. Okay. Then urbanization. Well, with urbanization comes the curse of pollution. And this is an image which I'm sure all of us are well versed with. All of us are very familiar with these kind of images. So, what is this? Basically, and why is it that urbanization causes this level of pollution? Because as and when urbanization and the pace of urbanization picks up, you will find that more and more number of industrial activities will take place, isn't it? Industrial activities, population will spread, so the natural systems will not have that much amount of space for them, for themselves. Then you will find that when we talk about this process of urbanization here, basically large industrial discharge, solid waste dumping, and understand one larger phenomena which deals with a portion of human geography, And understand this concept. Urbanization. What is that term? An area is becoming an urban landscape. That is what is urbanization. We are not talking about urban pollution. We are talking about urbanization as a cause of pollution. There's a difference. It is a subtle difference, but there is a difference. When we have more and more areas getting converted into urban centers, how are they getting converted into urban centers? What do we mean by urban centers? Where majority of the people are actually engaged in secondary or tertiary activities. That is the activity of industrial production or services, etc. So that is why the industrial growth will happen. When you talk about large industries, and again I will reiterate this, keep that in mind always. Largely, our perception is that the large industries, they are the sources of contamination, they are the sources of pollutant. It is not so. Large industries, they do not have the scope. They are under so much of scrutiny. They are always under so much of public and media glare that they don't have the scope to pollute so significantly. For example, here, take the case of the mining waste that we have been talking about. I hope you are aware that one of the larger Indian conglomerates, that is the Adani Group, basically bought out the Carmichael mines in the region of Queensland in Australia. Because Australia has got good grade of coal that India tends to import. So Adani went ahead and bought that entire region of coal-rich region. Now, the perception that the public had was that if that mining is, obviously, you always have that corporate espionage and the corporate pulling of leg also. So you never know whether a particular agitation against a particular company is fueled by someone else, or is someone else going to benefit if those activities are stopped, etc. But nonetheless, you had a continued large scale protest in that region of Queensland in Australia, because the thought process was that if this mining process is being carried out, now that mining waste will be discharged into the nearby water bodies, and that can disrupt our coral ecosystem. Adani, for a long period of time, could not carry out the business. Even today, they are not carrying out the business of extraction as normally they would. Simultaneously, in that region, mind you, you have smaller industries, smaller companies who are running very easily, carrying out that pollution under the nose. So, when you have large industries, you don't have the scope to pollute. It is the medium, the small scale industries, which operate without much regulation there, and they don't have the capacity or the wherewithal to have the good and the modern machinery. They are the ones which pollute significantly. They are the ones which will continue to discharge the waste without any accountability. Right? Because overnight, if let's suppose there is an inspection to happen, overnight they can shut it down, they can move somewhere else. So that is where, when urbanization happens, many of these small production centers, they start coming into existence and they carry out pollution. But also, an area, when it starts becoming an urban center, it will start attracting a lot of migrant labor from all around. And that has been the story of every region across the world. As soon as an area started turning urban, be it in the region of Europe, if you consider the region around London, for example, London would be the poster child of the most polluted city across the world around the 1700s and the early 1800s, even up till the late 1800s. It would be the poster child for that. The cities in US, particularly the East Coast, for example, in New York, you have the region which is known as Manhattan. Manhattan is an area where you had the World Trade Center and all the various different business centers, the various different business units, they operate in Manhattan. Manhattan was an area of the marshes, where as the city of New York was settling and was getting urbanized, all the waste from that region would be discharged in that marshy land of Manhattan. So Manhattan had become a solid ground, waste ground. It was reclaimed later on. So whenever you have urbanization, a lot of people move in, population boom and explosion happens in that area. And where will those people live? For example, if a migrant laborer comes from, let's suppose, Murshidabad in West Bengal to the region of Mumbai, will that person straight away start living in the region around Marine Drive? Or will that person get a house or an accommodation in Malabar Hill or in Bandra Kurla complex? No. That person will start living across the floodplains, across the fringes of the city, near the river water. Right? Open defecation will be the case. Dumping of waste will be a commonality. Growth of slums will be a reality. That also pollutes the land for many, many years to come. Okay, so in a kind of unsustainable, unsustained growth of population, leading to a kind of unhygienic practices or open defecation or simply dumping of solid waste. So, open defecation, dumping of waste, or simply dumps are created. Okay, so that is generally found to be present in the fringes of the larger urban area. I hope you are able to look at the larger picture and this is understood. Yes, so can we discharge industrial discharge so that it would not pollute India much? Can this be incorporated? You cannot discharge industrial discharge. You can treat the industrial discharge in a way that it is not polluting. Yes, you can write that. Okay, so here you also have municipal waste. Then also you have the case of construction debris, which comes under the part of municipal waste itself. All of that basically pollutes the land for a long period of time. So increase in the number of cities, population and industrialization, which directly or indirectly affects our ecosystem. It occurs due to the mixing of toxins in the soil by industries or the other various sources. As the waste is disposed of directly to water and soil from various sources, it gives rise to multiple diseases also. And excessive consumption of plastic bags, they accumulate in the soil and prevent germination of the seeds. And due to this, many of the times you also have to understand that what also happens is, for example, let's suppose in a particular region, in a particular area, let's suppose, you have basically put up some amount of waste which is discharging some chemicals, right? Some chemicals, maybe even electronic items, etc. It is discharging some chemicals, batteries, used battery systems. Now, the microbes which are present, the microorganisms which are present here, immediately they will die off, right? Chances are that the toxins and the heavy metals, they get like zinc, lead, etc. They get embedded within the soil and they are trapped in the soil for many, many long years to come. So thereby you are reducing the productivity of that region for coming decades also. Okay. Now, when we talk about solid waste in India, please understand here, data pointers are not required to be studied or learned. Data pointers are basically just for your reference here, just to indicate the kind of a trend here, but not required to be learned. So the total quantity of solid waste generated in the country is close to around 1.5 lakh tons per day. Efficiency of waste collection is only around 96.8%. Right? TPD here represents tons per day. Okay. The efficiency of waste collection is close to around 96.8%, close to around 97%. That much waste is collected. So think about it. 3% of the waste is not even collected, which tells you 3% is not a small amount, by the way. When we are talking about 3% of this amount of waste generated, we are talking about close to around 5,000 tons per day of waste is not even collected. Right? Now, 47% of the waste is treated and 25% of the total waste remains unaccounted for. We have no clue where that waste is. So, on the roadsides that you see, right, on the roadsides, on any open spaces, you yourself would have come across many of such brave individuals, the brave citizens of India, basically, who by they pick up a scooter or a motorbike most of the cases, or sometimes they move in the cars. They will lower down the windows, or when they think that nobody is looking at them, they will simply throw the waste in a very swift action, and they will start moving on as if nothing has happened. And they have not done this. Now the nature is responsible, the government is responsible. They keep on dumping that. So there, the problem is accounting of the total waste generated. We don't have that accounting. We don't have that detail that how much waste is basically disposed. That is the biggest concern. Okay. Now, as per the World Bank report, India is the third largest generator of solid waste in the world. But basically, with our increasing population, we are sure going to be passing this particular fact or scenario. Now, solid waste is classified into municipal waste, industrial or hazardous waste, and even biomedical waste, which is generated from the medical sector, from the primary healthcare centers, from the hospitals, etc. That is where the biomedical waste is generated from. When we say the municipal waste, what is that? It is also referred to as MSW in the sense, municipal solid waste, right? So municipal solid waste consists of household waste, construction and demolition debris, sanitation residue, and the waste generated from the streets in general. It comprises of both liquid and solid waste, and when this waste is dumped in an area, the decay and decomposition of this waste also releases many of the harmful gases which are going to warm up the earth and warm up the atmosphere, such as carbon dioxide, such as methane, such as hydrogen sulfide, few of the variety of and the types of furans. All of them are continuously emanated and released as the decaying of this municipal solid waste continues to happen. Okay. Now, here you can see the classification of the municipal solid waste is biodegradable and non-biodegradable. Biodegradable, by natural processes, the degradation can happen. Non-biodegradable, for example, you have thermocol, you have plastic, you have some of the construction debris, which naturally is not degraded. Okay, so that is the composition of the municipal solid waste. Batteries, etc. Yes. When we say industrial waste or hazardous waste, so they are characterized as the waste generated during the fabrication or industrial processes. Even for that matter, large hotels, when you have very large hotels or industries, when they secrete their waste or they dump their waste, that also comes into the industrial waste. Cafeteria reuse, the used oil, etc., dirt and gravel, masonry, mortar, that comes under industrial waste. Fly ash is included in that. Fly ash, we have talked about fly ash. Fly ash consists of silicates, cadmium, mercury, many of the various different contaminants. Now, fly ash is generally produced from where? Generally produced from thermal power plants. Generally produced from thermal power plants by burning of coal, and the fuel of where coal is used as a fuel, that is where the fly ash is basically generated. Now this fly ash is being utilized for manufacturing of bricks, right? That grayish ash colored bricks that you would have come across, that is basically composed of fly ash. Now that those bricks which are getting manufactured, which are being made, those bricks, they are not only lighter, they have a property where they can allow the percolation of water also. So they are very, very good for building purposes. They are very, very good for pavement laying. And it has been mandated in a certain region around the power plants, for example. The usage of fly ash bricks have been mandated. Otherwise, many of the times they get deposited over the leaves. And that is where, again, the productivity of the plant system and the productivity rate by photosynthesis tends to reduce. Okay. Having said that, there is a property of fly ash because it is so rich in various different minerals. If fly ash is applied in very trace amount, very, very small amount, limited amount, if it is applied to the soil, over a period of time, the soil becomes fertile because many of the micronutrients, not talking about the macronutrients such as nitrogen, phosphate, potash, micronutrients, they get enriched, which are also essential for plant growth. So this is also one of the future usage that we can have of fly ash. Okay. This is your industrial discharge. Industrial waste in India is generated in large quantities, but here, rather than looking at the data, I wanted to look at something else. When we talk about the industrial waste, significant 44% of the industrial waste, if you will see, is actually utilizable. You can reutilize it, right? Then around 25% is basically one of those that you have to put into the landfills. What are landfills? Where you dig out the ground surface, you fill it with the dump, and then you cover it with a type of a topsoil. So that is landfillable. Then 27% of that waste is basically recyclable, where you can recycle that waste, where you can put it to use again. So that is your recyclable waste. Okay. And then 4% overall is incinerable, which can be burnt. Right. So overall, if you can see that 44 and 27, almost close to around 71% of the industrial waste, almost 71% of the industrial waste can be reutilized, can be recycled. That is where we need to develop a circular economy, where we are able to extract the useful materials from the waste, process it, and thereby use it for the manufacturing of new materials. By processing it, whatever cleaner things come out or whatever utilizable things come out, there should be a commodity market where you can sell it off, make some money out of it, right? So here, almost 71%, this is a data point that you can keep in mind. Almost 71% of industrial waste is utilizable or can be recycled. Okay. So that is basically something you can keep in mind. Biomedical waste is what? When we say biomedical waste, we are basically talking about the waste that is generated from your hospitals, from your primary healthcare centers. There also, a lot of waste is generated. And we have seen the mishandling and the manhandling of those waste during the COVID pandemic, where we observed that during the COVID pandemic, bandages, blood-stained bandages, where you still have the living organisms might be present there, microbes might be present there. In many of the cases, the body parts, organs which have been removed during surgery, some of the waste parts which have been a byproduct, they are straight away thrown in the drains nearby. Now that triggers a kind of a massive chain of pollution. Now, many of the times it also happens that the biomedical industry or the hospital industry tends to utilize, for example, certain chemicals such as iodine 40, certain chemicals which are radioactive in nature, right? And there, if that waste is not disposed of properly, then it can contaminate the land nearby. For example, you have the medicines, the pills, the syrups. Now, when they pass their expiry date, many of them are dumped. In many of the cases, you will observe that the expiry date portion is rubbed off or it is rebranded and it is sold out to innocent customers, but in many of the cases, they are straight away dumped off. When they are dumped out into the open, these medicines are composed of various different pathogens, chemicals, etc. If they are left out open in the open, that is when there is a growth and a regeneration of drug resistant microbes, where the natural microbes that you find in the environment, they start becoming resistant to these drugs, to these antibiotics, because of the dumping which has happened. As a result of that, what happens? When you get sick and when those microbes impact you, and when you eat the medicines, you don't get better anymore. The antibiotics don't work on you anymore. And that is where you have to be taken to higher level of antibiotics, higher grade of antibiotics. And that is what weakens the body furthermore. Next time when you will get sick, further higher grade of antibiotic. Antimicrobial resistance is quite significant in India. That is a major problem, where majority of the infections that are happening, majority of the diseases which are happening, majority of us, we are suffering from the diseases, we get impacted by the diseases where the microbes are resistant to the drugs that are offered to us. Why? Because natural environment is where they are exposed to these drugs and they gain a kind of a resistance to it. Okay, so that is the biomedical waste, right? So we'll take a break now and we'll continue furthermore. Now, bandages, etc., that comes into the category of biomedical waste. Now, here, when we talk about the biomedical waste treatment, according to the type of waste that is generated, you basically have the different mechanism to treat them. You have different mechanisms to dispose them of. So, here, first of all, if you take a look at it, basically, if let's suppose when we come across needles and cut glasses, right, they are basically put into a whitish plastic container. Nowadays, you will find that in the hospitals. You have different colored containers, each of them designated for the different type of waste that is put into them. Now, needles and cut glasses will be put into the white container, whitish container, syringes, gloves, and the plastic waste, then placenta, then pathological waste and the body parts, which is a kind of an outcome of a kind of a surgery or an operation or any of these kinds. Now that is stored in a yellow plastic container, which after the treatment is basically stored in a very deep burial facilities, right? Syringes, gloves, and plastics, they are basically recycled after a point of time. You have infected dressings, pop cast. For example, let's suppose you have experienced, or let's suppose you have suffered from a fracture. Now, after that, you basically have the casting, the pop cast on your hand, right? Now, after you get that cast removed, that is also a biomedical waste, because there over a period of time you have that pop having many of these microorganisms which would have germinated in that point of time. You cannot simply throw them out into the normal condition, normal environment, can you? You basically store them somewhere. So that is where you have the red plastic containers, which you will find there. Also, it is carried out for a deep burial. Then you have some of the non-infected waste. All of these are infected waste. Non-infected waste, for example, the pills, the medicines, all of them, the chemicals which are used, they are basically secured in a landfill. A kind of a separate disposal site is basically accountable and is basically attributable for that. So that is how you basically end up treating the biomedical waste. If we are able to accumulate, if we are able to account for all the various different types of waste generated, that in itself will be a significantly larger milestone. Okay, till now we don't have that ability to take care of all the waste which is generated. It is only after COVID and the COVID pandemic, when there was a greater level of awareness about this biomedical waste, because we suffered from that during the time of the COVID pandemic. And please understand, if this biomedical waste is not properly secured and treated, that in itself can also trigger many of the various different reactions. many of the various infectious diseases can spread from there. Okay. And then you never know when that can turn into a kind of an epidemic of large proportions in that area. So here, basically about 619 tons per day of biomed waste was generated around 2019. That number has increased quite significantly. Now, around 544 tons per day is only treated and disposed of. So you can think about it that you still have large proportions of biomedical waste which is not accounted for. So here, few of that waste or some amount of that waste is still generated and is stored in the deep burials. Please understand here, you have various different data pointers. There is a reason why I'm not indicating to you that what is the data pointer for 22, 23, etc. The reason is very simple. You are not expected to learn these data pointers. You are just expected to understand the larger picture, that of the total waste which is generated, we are not able to account for or collect all that waste. That is a major problem. The second problem is that of treatment. Let's suppose we have accumulated some portion, 75% of the waste we have basically collected from all the various hospitals. We have collected 75%. Now, amongst that 75%, are we able to tackle or treat or dispose of all of them? The answer is no there also. So that is why these biomedical waste, they are quite significantly an issue where you have to understand it comes with the waste disposal. How do you dispose the waste? Whether you have the treatment facilities, waste logistics, if all of them are in place, only then we can look forward to a better handling of the waste. Now you also have the plastic and the microplastic waste. Now, plastic waste or plastic pollution is basically carried on by the plastic bags, the plastic bottles, etc. that you and I, we basically throw it out on a daily basis, day-to-day basis, right? Now, these microplastics, they are very, very small. Microplastics is when the plastic gets disintegrated. Let's suppose a plastic bag, it won't be degraded naturally. It is not as if the plastic naturally will be decomposed. You have a separate category of plastics which are now being made, which is the biodegradable kind of a plastic. That is a separate kind of a plastic. But the plastic bags that you're given from the vegetable vendors, for example, where you go, or for example, in the nearby ration shops or the nearby stores that you go and you get that normal plastics, they are not biodegradable. Now, those plastics, due to the forces of nature, they can be broken into many small fragments, but still they are persistent, right? They are persistent, they stay there. And that is when they get into the bloodstream, they not bloodstream rather, but initially they get into the digestive tract where they keep on getting accumulated. So bioaccumulation is a major issue with that kind of a microplastic and a plastic waste. Okay, so leads to bioaccumulation. Substantial amount of bioaccumulation. Now, this is a scenario that all of us are aware of and all of us are well versed with. Now, this also you have to understand that many of the times, let's suppose you have this plastic which is dumped on the ground. Let's suppose on the ground surface, you have substantial amount of plastic which is dumped. Let's suppose. Okay. Now, if there is rainfall, which happens in this area, and over a period of time, as this in the region of where you have the waste which is dumped, I hope we are aware and we are basically well versed with the fact that it is not as if in a region only plastic waste will be there or only organic waste will be there. Oftentimes we come across a scenario what comes into the category of commingled waste, where you have a mixture of them. Now, when you have that mixture of both plastic as well as decomposable materials, heat is produced. Enough amount of heat is produced. Now, in that heat, you have some amount of chemicals which are secreted by these plastic. Some amount of some types of chemicals which can be secreted. In the event of a rainfall, then these chemicals, they start seeping. they start leaking. And they will basically end up polluting the subsoil region also, making the entire subsoil region also infertile. So here the subsoil gets infertile. Vivek, tomorrow we don't have the doubt clearing session. Tomorrow we will have a normal session. Doubt clearing session will be taken up on Thursday itself. Don't worry about that. Tomorrow we will have a normal session. Okay. Now, when we talk about the plastic waste in India, as per the United Nations Environment Program baseline, India is the fifth largest generator of plastic waste, and that waste generated is going to keep on increasing. That is why it is of urgent need to replace the plastic. You have the single-use plastic ban which has been imposed, right? Various different state governments, the national government, the central government rather, they are working for banning the single-use plastic. But why do you think it is not successful till now? Till now, you'll not find that single-use plastic has been put out of use. Why is it the case? That is primarily because when you have plastic, the plastic bags, they have a good carrying capacity, right? They have a good strength. Secondly, they are very, very cheap, very cheap. If let's suppose you develop an alternative such as paper bags, many of the areas you will find paper bags, isn't it? Now, these paper bags, first of all, if you put it at the same rate, if you try to produce it at the same rate at which you are producing the plastic, those papers will be very flimsy. They won't have the weight carrying capacity. They will easily give way. They will easily tear off. When we talk about that waste, or rather the plastic and a replacement of it, let's suppose jute, or let's suppose the kind of cotton and cotton fabric or any other fabric which is used to manufacture those bags, they will be costly. You go there and try to ask for a jute bag from any of the shopkeepers, they will charge you more. This is the reason why even today you'll find, despite the bans being imposed by the various different governments at various different levels, still you will find people using that plastic, because plastic is a kind of a cheap alternative. Having a good carrying capacity, load bearing capacity is significant. That is why plastic is very, very prevalent. If we need to prevent that plastic pollution, we need to develop an alternative. Till now, we have not managed to develop an alternative at the same price point at which plastic is used. Having said that, you have Rwanda, which has successfully managed to weed out the usage of plastic. Think about it. An African country has managed to do so. So that tells you, if the legislation is strong enough, if the penalties are in place, and if there is a mass level of awareness, as long as the attitude of the general public and the general populace is that if I use it, how will the government come to know? And I will basically use it. And then the if the government has to take action, they should basically prevent other people from using. If we have that level of attitude and public participation, then we will never be able to weed out the plastic waste, because for the vegetable vendors, for the storekeepers, anyways, they are buying it at a very cheap rate, right? And when you go there, you buy some vegetables, generally people, now they still there is a kind of a trend where people carry their own bags, but still you will have many people who reach there that we don't have any carrying bags or any of the plastic bags or any of the materials to carry these things with, so give us the plastic bag. This is the reason why the utility of plastic is not found till now, or the replacement of plastic rather has not been found till now, due to which the problem of plastic pollution is still very, very persistent. Okay. And what about 100% compostable bags similar to plastic bags? So that is basically going to be the significantly utilizable. When you have 100% compostable bags, it is going to be significantly beneficial. But then that is also not available everywhere, because it is not cheap. It is not as cheap as the non-compostable plastic bag. That is very, very cheap. Why the government are not banning the plastic? Shambhavi, the government has brought about restrictions. State governments have brought about restrictions. The central government has brought about restrictions. But it is about the utility. You still have many of the small industries which continue to produce that plastic, which basically they run away from the scrutiny of the government. They are not in the public eye, and that is where the plastic supply continues to happen. So not only do we have to cut the supply source, at the same time we need to find the alternative as well. Why do these people bring things in plastic bags rather use their own cloth bags? So that is where you need awareness, that is where you need public participation. And as I told you during the time of the when we were discussing the National Mission for Clean Ganga, for any program to succeed, public participation is a must, regardless of whatever kind of, in a democracy obviously. If you are China, you can make any policy succeed. You can say that imposition of or utility of plastic is banned, and anybody found using that plastic bag, you jail them for life, or you kill them, or you make them disappear. Obviously the rest of the people will never be using that. But in a kind of a democratic setup, unless and until you have the people's awareness and the people's movement, no policy action can reach fruition or can be successful. We can use jute bag also, but jute bag, is it available at the same price? No, jute bag is very, very costly, isn't it? And if government impose restrictions on plastic bags and order the purchasers to carry your bags from home, so the government is already doing that, my dear friend. That is what I'm telling you. And why plastic bag production is not stopped, that is what I'm telling you. Large industries are not producing plastic anymore. You have the small industries, the small scale industries, which operate in a kind of a outside the regulations. They will continue to be using that. Proper waste segregation and disposal should be followed in each household strictly, so that waste don't reach landfills and oceans. People generally tend to blame government instead of looking at their own actions. I couldn't agree with you more. This is a kind of the perfect conclusion that you can write for any of the answer about waste management and about the problem of the waste accumulation. This is the kind of a conclusion that you have to write, that it is basically the if you have to clean the environment, the action has to start at the level of the people. And if the government provide a subsidy for jute bag or compost bag, people may, but still the subsidy required will be in large amount, very, very large amount. You would be staring at a figure which which would pull or punch a very great hole in the coffers of the government. So you cannot provide that. You can incentivize the industries by providing them, let's suppose, newer instruments, etc. You can bring forward the researches, and government run institutions can basically carry out the researches for the newer materials, and then that research can be made easily available free of cost to the industries. So that help the government can do. But if you provide subsidy for every jute bag that is produced, where does it end? Now jute bags are produced of various different sizes and dimensions. Do you provide the incentive or a subsidy on all of them? Right, subsidy is never the solution, my dear friend. um, why not government trace out these kind of industries? You have other larger issues that the local government and the municipalities deal with. And but certain sections, people also demand the old plastic bags. That is true. That is true, absolutely true. Basically, when you talk about the if you talk about the general populace, and if ever possible, try to engage with the general population, and then you will understand the futility of the government actions, regardless of whatever the government does. You try to engage in an argument with them that why are you using the plastic bags? It is polluting the environment. The immediate counter argument that they will give, that the entire world is using them, why only me? So you tell them that it starts from you. Then they will tell that what about the industrialists who are polluting? First take them into account, then I will do. So it never ends. That is the kind of a non-responsive or a non-accountable response that we have developed over a period of time. This is that kind of psychology which leads people to throw garbage on the streets, throw the waste food on the streets, rolling down the windows of their vehicles, throwing the garbage on the street, and thinking about it that first take care of all the lawless things across the world. Then you tell me, right? They are not ready to uh, understand, or they are not ready to think about it, that they are also a cause of pollution. So that is where, try it out. Sometimes take it as a case study, try to engage with other population, and even in your own family, extended family. Go to your uncle, go to your aunt, your relatives, talk to them about it. You will be surprised to know about the tendency, the psyche of the general population. And that is why the people, they demand plastic. You will find that many of the vegetable vendors, many of, for example, the meat shops, many of them, they started giving out alternatives, or they started making it a kind of an imposition that you have to bring your own carry bags. People simply stop going to their shop. So think about it, you are a shopkeeper. People have stopped coming to your shop because you are not providing them plastic bags. What will you do? Will you shut down your business? Will you start a kind of an NGO? No. You will basically start buying those plastic bags because you want your business up and running, isn't it? And yes, the jute bags, cotton bags are costly, but they are reusable. That is true. That is true. Some types of plastics are also reusable. Now you have biodegradable, compostable plastics also, but they are costly, right? And people are not ready to pay, by the way, for the carry bags. In a scenario, in a society where we are always in a tendency that whatever money we can fleece from somewhere, we think about it as a victory. uh, Giving money for the plastic bags or the carry bags, nobody is going to do that. Okay. And what about plastic eating bacteria? So they are basically the plastic eating bacteria. They are they are specially lab grown in certain areas, but you cannot end up introducing them everywhere, can you? Because please understand, it is not as if the plastic eating bacteria will only eat plastic, and if unless and until plastic is not provided, they will sit there that, okay, bring me more plastic, I will eat plastic. No. If you introduce them into the common environment, after they have done consuming the plastic, they will start consuming other things in the soil. And that is when many of the times they basically drain the soil of all the various utilizable nutrients. The soil becomes very, very poor as a consequence, as a result of that. In our country, there are considerable trust deficit between the common citizens and the government machinery. That is true, and that is a part of the colonial legacy that we have. The colonial legacy that we are still inheriting, where we always look at the government with a kind of a suspicion that if the government is saying something, either it is promoting the industrialists, or the government is trying to fleece us. It is trying to fool us. That is why you don't have public participation in any of the government programs. That is why, regardless of the outcomes, that is why certain programs, certain government schemes, for example, Swachh Bharat, regardless of whatever the final outcome. For example, today there was a significant news report about the World Bank report, which talked about the decreasing toilet use in India from 2018 to 2021. That report was withheld due to the pressure built up by the government. That is what the media reports are telling us. But basically, understand, Swachh Bharat Abhiyan was not only about building the toilets. Swachh Bharat Abhiyan was about building that conversation. We don't have that conversation in the society, do we? Rarely do you have a conversation in the society that defecating in the open is bad, or basically urinating out there in the open is bad, or using plastic is bad, or dumping waste in the open is bad. We don't have that conversation, do we? We all think that all of that is the work of the government. Which government? We don't care. It is the municipalities who don't have that capacity. All the municipal corporations in the country, they are running on almost fumes. They don't have financial wherewithal at all. They are in a very, very poor state, because whatever money or revenue they get, that is very little amount. Municipalities get very, very little, unless and until you obviously are, if you are Bombay Municipal Corporation, you are amongst the richest municipalities across the world. You have a budget of around 40,000, 50,000 crores. But even then, they have their political masters that they have to give money to. They have the electorate that they have to give money to. So you don't have money in order to spend on these. That is why the public service in our country is in such a bad state. Now, for the past 3 to 4 years, another thing that you would be finding is, and thanks to the new bureaucrats, the new IAS officers, the young ones, many of them, they get their posting in the municipal corporations. Observe the turnaround which has been done, which has been made by the municipal corporation in Indore, in Gwalior, in Bhopal, in Mysore, in Karnataka. The turnaround has been tremendous. It is not as if the waste is not generated in these cities, but they have developed a systemic process by which to account for all the waste generated, immediately accumulate all the waste, collect all the waste, and then carry out to the disposal facilities. And this is being done, this is being led at the forefront by the bureaucrats who have basically entered into the services around 5-10 years back. So that is where maybe as the new generation, which is much more aware, new generation, which is much more open to the fact that fair enough, even if that means angering certain sections of the society, we need to take a step. If that generation comes forward, that is when we can expect a change. And that is where you guys becoming bureaucrats in the future have the potential to bring about a change. Okay. Now, UNEP, basically, Puja is United Nations Environment Program. CPCB is Central Pollution Control Board. Satyapal, should the government not put strict restriction on public? How do you enforce that? How do you implement that? And then recently government have banned plastic, but they are still being used, Shruti, because of the low cost, the load carrying capacity. Then if phytoplanktons are microscopic, then how does it block the sunlight and the dissolved oxygen? Because you, Chandrasekhar, you have an entire layer of these phytoplanktons, millions of these. It is not as if one phytoplankton is there. You have millions and millions of them forming a kind of a protective film, a sheet like of thing. So on the lakes in your city, in one of the polluted lakes, you observe that green film which develops on water. Think about it. Those are made up by algae. So won't they be able to block sunlight? Obviously they will. Right. Right. And government should impose high tax. What does the government want to be voted out of power? What, that they will impose high tax? Anyways, the aspect or the issue of taxation is so very structured. Right. And Yashi, can power loom industry creating noise pollution be shifted if an appeal against it is done? Yes, if a public litigation is filed and if it is found to be violating the aspects of noise, public litigation or an application is filed to the or brought to the State Pollution Control Board or the CPCB, they have the power granted to them under the provisions of Air Act 1981, and after that the Environment Act 1986. They can take actions. Okay. And right, is there any convention to save the Arctic and Antarctic polar ice cap from melting? You basically have the conventions of climate change itself, which are basically, the aim is that lower the rate of warming, you can basically preserve them, right? And I think I have answered most of the questions. Anushka, for liquid material, we need plastic bag. Is there any substitute? Absolutely. You have various different grade of fabrics which are made. For example, hemp and paper, they are mixed together to form a kind of an impenetrable material. So for example, nowadays you will find that there also, sadly, you will find the plastic caps which are there, but generally you will find that the restaurants, they have started using, the hotel industry has started using that, where they use a kind of a special thicker paper material in laced with the fabrics, and that induces a kind of a impermeable. But again, that is costly. That is the problem. We need to bring the price point down. We are not living in a Western Europe, or we are not living in North America where the per capita income is so very high that everybody can afford that. No, So that is why, unless and until you bring the price point down, there is no benefit to it. Okay. And ozone chain reaction is difficult to memorize. It is very simple that you have to understand how chlorine reacts with ozone. That is the only reaction you have to understand. Aniket, due to this plastic pollution mostly impacts the mammals and birds. That is true. You have a lot of bovine, the cattle, which die due to ingestion of this plastic. And in case you are not aware, you'll be surprised to know the number of cattle death that India experiences due to ingestion of plastic. So it damages the environment quite significantly. What is the substitution? Substitute of the plastic is, maybe if you don't want to replace the plastic, at least ensure that the plastic that you are manufacturing is biodegradable. And we have the technology for that. Ensure that basically you produce it in such large volumes. Maybe you become the producer and the supplier for the world, where you are able to reduce the price point. Ensure you carry out enough research to basically produce jute at a very cheap rate, or reusable. So for example, you have clothes and the various different types of fabrics which are thrown in the waste. Reuse that in order to basically make up a kind of a newer material. That is why research is needed. And what to do with the plastic waste? The best way is to basically carry out a kind of a controlled combustion. You break them down into multiple smaller pieces, controlled combustion, or you recycle them, or in that controlled combustion, the heat produced by the plastic can be used to produce energy. That heat produced can be used to boil the water, convert water into steam, and that steam can basically run the generator turbine system, produce electricity as a result of it. But unless and until we stop it, or we cut it from the very base where the supply is being done, we won't be very, very successful. PVC pipes are, yes, Muskan. And PVC pipes, basically, they are also leading to the contamination of water many of the times. And could we not use the water of Antarctica? We can, but it will be cheaper for us to basically convert the saline water from the nearby sea and then convert into fresh water. That will be much cheaper for us than to bring ice cap from the region of Antarctica and carry it out and then use it somewhere else. Okay. Air pollution does happen. That is why I say controlled combustion. In the waste to energy converters, what you do is that all the inorganic waste, you break it down into very small particles so that combustion can happen, it can be burned, and the gases which are released, those gases are passed through wet scrubbers where water is sprayed over those gases so that the wasteful gases, they don't come out. You only have few of them, not harmful, non-harmful, non-poisonous gases which are released. Rest of them are retained. So that kind of a mechanism you need. You don't need a kind of an Okla waste to energy plant that we had seen, where you are polluting more than the natural pollution in the environment. So you need that kind of a treatment. Okay. Now, then we come to e-waste. Now, e-waste refers to the waste generated from the electric and electronic equipments, what is also referred to as EEE. That is electrical and electronic equipment. Okay, so that is what is regarded as the e-waste. Now, when we talk about e-waste or electric or electronic waste, it includes various different types. For example, this plastic pen that I have, which is used, which has got electronic items inside it, that is also an e-waste. The thing is, in our country, again, and that is the case in many parts of the world, but sadly, in many parts of the world, you have the organized sector which is rising up. In our country, we don't have much awareness about what to do with the e-waste. For example, in your household also, right? If not your immediate family, maybe your extended family, maybe your neighbors, you would still come across a tendency that they would have preserved the old mobile phones, that we'll use it sometime. When, where, how, why, they don't know. but we'll use it sometime, right? So that is basically the lack of awareness, lack of idea what to do with the electronic waste. Let's suppose you're using a TV remote, the TV remote goes bad, and you buy a new remote. What do you do with the older one? You don't know where to throw it off. You basically store it somewhere. That maybe some fine day I will use it. You will never use it, but you keep it somewhere. And you then, after a point of time, let's suppose you get so very fed up that I cannot keep more garbage in my house, you simply throw it with the other waste, right? Now, these electronic items, electrical items, they also have various different chemicals, coatings, etc. And in the event when they are disposed of in the natural land, in the natural area, these chemicals, they are secreted, and these chemicals, they basically accumulate in the subsoil region, furthering the level of contamination. So that is where e-waste needs to be handled. But for that, we need a better awareness about what is that e-waste. By the way, I hope we are able to understand the difference between electrical and electronic waste. Electrical waste or electrical equipments basically are those equipments which operate on large voltages and large current parameters. For example, you have, let's suppose, the a kind of a transformer, that is an electrical waste, right? But if you have, for example, watches, if, for example, mobile phones, for example, small pocket calculators, they operate at very, very small voltage and ampere, milliampere, millivolts. That is where they operate. So these are your electronic equipment. Now, electrical and electronic equipment, we need to have a proper collection and disposal mechanism, that how we are going to treat them. Because please understand, majority of these, they will have the presence of printed circuit boards inside them, various circuitry inside them. For example, your mobile phone or the TV remote that you use, the complex ones. Now there, you'll find the presence of certain amount of microchips, etc. And also presence of the silver wiring, presence of gold lining in certain cases, presence of many of the equipments, for example, ICs. Now they can be reused. China, for that matter, has established a very large industry in that area, where the entire industrial ecosystem has developed for the reuse and recycle of these e-waste. You have a lot of professionals who have been trained into the aspect that how to extract the valuable components of that e-waste, and the remaining amount which is not utilizable, that is disposed of. But when you extract the utilizable materials, what do? You can use them to manufacture the newer electronic items. So when you are reusing them to manufacture the newer items, what will happen to the price? The price of the newer electronics will automatically go down, because you don't have to use fresh materials for that manufacturing. So the price will go down. And when the price goes down, the consumer benefits, they will buy more, right? The people have found jobs in extraction of the materials as well. That is where it is a reduce, reuse, recycle industry which gets significantly boosted. In our country, the problem is that, first of all, we don't have that awareness, and we attach too much amount of sentimental value to the electronic items, right? The older mobile phones, the old mobile chargers which don't function anymore, which don't work anymore, the old wiring, etc., which might not be working at all. At some or the other corner of many of the Indian houses, you still find them kept, right? Maybe after decades, the expectation is that this will start burning like and glowing like starlight, which it will never do, right? So we don't have an avenue where to throw. And most of the recycling is done in the unorganized sector. The problem with the unorganized sector is that, first of all, proper awareness is not there, that out of all this waste, what is the utilizable material? What are the other utilizable materials? So there is a reduced efficiency in terms of recycle. Secondly, they often times use acids and various chemicals to dissolve these materials, which produce a lot of fumes. So for the worker population working in these unorganized sectors, they don't have awareness about those fumes, and that can be poisonous. So you don't have protective gear that are worn by them. They don't have that protective gear, protective equipment around them. So that is basically the issue with this particular e-waste. Okay. So e-waste means electrical or electronic equipment, whole or in part, discarded as waste by the consumer or bulk consumer, as well as reject from manufacturing, refurbishment, and repair processes. It is a source of toxic and hazardous pollutants, including PVC, lead, and mercury, cadmium, zinc, lithium, boron. These are also the heavy contaminants which are released. Now, 95% of e-waste in India are recycled in the informal sector, which is a kind of a bad news. Okay. Now, in India, the amount of e-waste that we are generating, that is set to increase almost exponentially within the next 2 to 3 decades. And why is it so? Why is it that it is going to increase? Because we have a youthful population. We have a young population. Almost 65% of the population is below the age of 35 years. Right? So there is a greater adaptability to newer tech. And newer tech comes in the form of these electronic devices and equipments. Almost every 6 months, you have the technology which gets upgraded. And as young people, you have a penchant to keep on changing the mobile phones, the television sets, the laptops that you have. So the older ones will keep on getting discarded. So the amount of e-waste generated in India is set to grow by almost 40 times in the next 3 decades. That is why we need to start taking this issue or this problem very seriously now itself. Okay, so here, when we talk about these, basically all this kind of e-waste, that e-waste management is being done by the changes in the e-waste rules that we will study very soon. But before that, what are the impacts of land pollution? The various different types of pollutants which carry out this land pollution. So first of all, agriculture. If the land gets polluted with the various toxins, with the various different adulterants, it will have a reduced ability because the microbial population in the land will reduce. And if the microbial population will reduce, for example, the nitrifying or the denitrifying bacteria, if their population reduces, then what will happen? Ability to fix nitrogen, that will remove, that will reduce. So why does this happen? This also, toxins or contaminants reduce or kill the vital microbial population. Okay, so the soil starts turning infertile. And when the soil starts turning infertile, you will have reduced crop yield and eventually the reduced farm income also. Eventually, the soil gets degraded, right? Generally, what you find in your city also, if you have seen an old garbage dump, unless and until, if that garbage dump is then removed, unless and until you treat that soil remains unutilizable. So that leads to soil degradation. And eventually, when the nature or the fertility of the soil reduces, and you have toxins, heavy toxins and chemicals, which will be present there for maybe many years together, it will not be able to support plant life. And its inability to support plant life will eventually lead to desertification of that area also. Okay. Now, health issues also, because of the various different contaminants which are released in the air. You have breathing issues, skin diseases, release of lead in the soil. Lead is one of those pollutants which does, for example, the old pipes that you had, the old sewage pipes. For example, any of you living in those government buildings, right? Now, old government buildings, all of them had lead pipes. So basically, there also that lead contamination basically leads to nervous disorder, and it inhibits the cognitive development or the mental growth of the young children as well. Now, landfills and waste dumping also lead to air pollution. We'll take a look at that also. Now, reduced vegetation leads to barren land. that creates an ecological imbalance in the soil flora and fauna. Water pollution, if there is no top vegetation to basically hold the topsoil, you will have the loss of topsoil also. I will write it down here. Basically, the inability of the soil to support vegetation renders the soil infertile, or rather renders the soil prone to be carried away by winds, rainwater, etc. There will be erosion. Habitat loss for the various species will happen. Then risk of wildfire, that will also be prone because of the chemicals which are there. Biomagnification and bioaccumulation is also, for example, the crops, as has been pointed out, will become unhealthy to eat. Kumari, I have started an initiative along with my community to collect and send e-waste to the organizations accepting waste. That is commendable. Make sure that you use it ably well. You portray, you are able to market it ably well when you reach the portion, when you reach the stage of interview. I'm not saying that do it for the selfish motive, but if you have done these initiatives, you will be rewarded quite significantly at the time of the interview. But for that, you need to reach the interview stage. Okay, and then urban areas, the impact of land pollution, clogging of drains, which causes urban flood, right? Inundation of the areas, the various different areas get flooded, foul smell and release of gases, due to which you have not only the aesthetic issue, the region looks dirty, but along with that, many waterborne diseases, they get spread. For example, you have the spread of diseases such as malaria, dengue, chikungunya, etc. All of that becomes very, very prominent, right? So that is why even the health issue in the urban areas gets impacted. Now we come to the prevention and control measures. This is going to be relevant for your mains exam. And will the entire portion be relevant for the mains exam? No. The latest developments, latest changes, and along with that, you will also find the relevance of in prelims. There also, the latest changes have been asked and will be asked. Okay, UPSC has asked that previously. Tomorrow we'll discuss these, the PYQs, the couple of PYQs which have been asked from this, so that you get an idea about the type of questions. Now here, first of all, before we take a look at the various different governmental measures, etc., which have been taken for waste management, understand the concept of integrated waste management. So waste management, what we think about waste management, what our perception for waste management is: collect the waste, dispose the waste in a safe area. That's it. But when we talk about waste management, it involves a whole gamut of processes. I hope we are aware that many of the universities, such as the Massachusetts Institute, for example, even Harvard, they have been offering degrees and courses and programs for waste management. That is a kind of a sunrise sector as of now, because everybody is aware that going ahead into the future, the major problem of the world will be how to tackle this large amount of e-waste, plastic waste, etc. That is why this is one of the high paying jobs that you find out in the world if you have a specialization for it, right? But when we talk about integrated waste management, it covers a wide gamut of activities, right from minimization of waste. So the amount of waste that you are throwing out, minimize that. Then segregate the waste at the source itself. Then You need proper collection facilities. For that, you need proper awareness about how much waste is being generated. You need legal compliance. For example, CPCB has set a kind of a mandate that this industry cannot emit more than this amount of effluents into the, or cannot discharge more amount of effluents into the water. Is there a compliance or is there a violation which is happening? We need to have that legal reportage of that. If there is a violation, immediate action should be taken in a transparent manner. What is the trend nowadays? Uh, Nowadays, that the digitization has happened, obviously, that level of corruption has come down. But mostly, almost all the industries which are flouting the norms, for example, going to the region around Ghaziabad, the Sahibabad region, or going to the vicinities of Hyderabad also, right? There also, you will find many of the Kanpur is one of those areas, Lucknow is one of those areas. Many of the small scale industries which operate, as soon as the officials they come, they are basically fed and taken care of, and then the companies continue to operate. If there is a litigation which is filed, if a citizen suit is filed, then that citizen is paid off, right? So we need transparency in that about legal reportage. But nonetheless, you minimize the waste, you segregate the kind of a waste, you ensure everybody is within their legal parameters. After that, what do? After that, waste logistic is very important. That, are we able, do we have enough capacity to carry all the waste? In majority of the metros or the large cities, what do you find? How is that waste transported? You will have either a truck which is over flooding with waste in such a way that it basically, as the truck moves, even after 1 hour, you will be able to figure out the path that the truck has taken, the route that the truck has taken, because all the way it will keep on dropping something or the other, forming a kind of a line to indicate that this is the path that the garbage truck had taken, because it is not having enough capacity. You don't have enough trucks for that. But in many of the cities, you observe something which is, in a way, much more pathetic, and in certain cases, much more hilarious also. You have those dingy, very rickety, and in shambles three wheelers, the auto rickshaws, right, which have been converted of sorts as carrier auto rickshaws, where if you take a look at them, it appears as if maybe if heavy rainfall will occur, maybe that auto rickshaw will explode, or maybe it will disintegrate to the ground. That is how weak it looks. But it will be full with all that garbage, somehow trying to move at a speed of 3 km per hour or 2 km per hour, polluting the air much more along the way. So the waste logistics need to be sorted out. We need to be able to basically carry that waste into the disposal centers. Now, let's suppose you sort that out. Now you carry that waste into the treatment facilities. Once you have taken that waste to the treatment facilities, then what you do? You need to sort out that waste. The utilizable atoms. First of all, you have segregated them at source itself. So you have the biodegradable and the non-biodegradable waste, they are separated, isn't it? Then after that, when you talk about that waste disposal, so you need to recycle certain materials. For example, metals and the metallic waste. You can always recycle them, isn't it? Plastics also you can recycle. So separate the recyclable materials, reuse them, recycle them. Let's suppose from those metals, you are able to extract some, or you are able to then refine it, send it to the processing facilities where you are able to basically reduce them to metal nuggets or metal pieces, which can then be sent to the new automobile industries, etc. So you need a proper commodity exchange market where you are able to sell those materials. Right now, what the condition is, most of the recyclable materials, they are basically sold to the small and medium industries in a black market, in a kind of an informal exchange. Now, what does that lead to? Is basically, again, a kind of a black economy which keeps on growing, which keeps on germinating in that area. So that is basically the entire gamut of the waste management, right? How officers are taken well, I mean, taken care of. Officers are taken care of. That is the reason why you have people, many of the people, you will find they have PhD degrees. They can easily find a job as, if they go to the private institutes, they can easily find a job as lecturers. But what do? They will basically work hard tooth and nail to get into the government job. Why? Nobody can fire them from there. And secondly, they know that they will be taken well care of, they will be well off, right? This is a tendency that you will find in almost all the underdeveloped and developing nations of the world, almost all of them. You will find that the scramble for the government jobs is very, very high, because those are the only jobs which are not only respected, they are paid well. Go to the developed countries. In the developed countries, nobody is ready to take up the government jobs, right? The government is basically very tired and is significantly worried about finding new people. They are unable to find. They won't be able to attract talent from the private sector into the government sector. But in India, you tell them that I have a vacancy of in a government college as a lecturer. Look at the number of applications which will be generated. Why? Is it that a lot of people are ready to change the lives of the young ones? Is it that people really want to teach other people that what are the realities of the world? No. Hardly in government run institutions you will find the lecturers out there. Hardly in government jobs you will find there. So same is the case with the pollution control boards in the state services also. When you go there, you will find that. So that is a level of inadequacy which is always there, and that is what breeds corruption, right? So that is something which, if you observe the trend across the globe, not only in India, across the globe, take a look at our neighbors. Take a look at the eastern and the western neighbors. The government job is most prized possession. Government, because you have security of job. Even if you don't go for 1 year, you won't be fired easily, would you? If you will be fired, the government will have to take drastic measures and be very, very unpopular to fire you. China works differently. China is a different world altogether. China, you have many of the government run or institutions and government organizations, but China has the wherewithal to enforce changes if it wants. For example, during the time of the economic spruce up, China at one go managed to fire around close to around 2 crore people from government jobs. Imagine if in the name of efficiency, Indian government from the government job fires not 2 crore people, 20,000, let's suppose. Can you imagine the consequence of that? Not only will the government be booted out of power, that government can lose the hope of coming back to power for the next 5 decades. So that is the predicament. That is why the implementation, all of you who are asking the questions that why can't we impose a ban on this? Why can't the government take action on this? It starts from the foot soldiers. Okay. Now, then here, if you talk about the various different stages, in this soil, polluted land crop will be toxic. Yes, it will be having the contaminants and bioaccumulation will be there, right? And now, after this here, take a look at it. First of all, you need to have waste classification also. The research and development needs to be done. What research and development? How to use that waste, how to put that waste to better economic usage. Okay. On-site services are required. That is about waste minimization. Reduce the amount of waste that is generated. Okay. Then resource recovery needs to be done, the recycling part. So recycling, metals recovery. Now suppose you have recycled certain metals, for example from the e-waste, you have managed to take out some amount of silver, some amount of gold. Now what do you do with that? You need a proper commodity trading where you can sell it off, right? Then for example solid and liquid waste treatment needs to be there for municipal waste which is generated. Waste logistics need to be worked upon. How are you transporting that waste from the source of disposal to the source of collection and to the source of treatment? Then waste disposal and facilities management, so development, operation and closure of these facilities need to be done. Legal compliance reporting needs to be done, whether everybody is adhering to the set norms and the emission standards, the effluent standards which have been set, or are people violating that? So for that, legal compliance also needs to be carefully ensured. So from here, what kind of a question can be asked? Discuss. No. Urban India is getting suffocated under the burden of untreated waste. Explain the statement and elaborate upon the concept of integrated waste management. This can be 15 marks, 250 words. Okay, so such kinds of statement based questions. So you can have a kind of a simple statement which you are asked to elaborate. That statement won't be any a difficult task for you, but in lieu of that statement, you can be asked to explain the larger concept of integrated waste management. And please also understand, see, if you are explaining the concept of integrated waste management, it should come naturally, because you know the problem in your urban area. So even if, let's suppose, you forget one of the steps here, let's suppose you are not able to concentrate upon research and development, fair enough, just talk about the rest of it, right? Talk about from the portion of waste segregation, minimization rather, waste minimization, waste segregation, then waste logistics, then waste disposal, then after that recycling, commodity trading, solid liquid waste management, disposal facilities, legal reportage. Just discuss that. And then research and development you have already forgotten, but otherwise, if you remember that, that can also be explained. So always bring your own experience to the table, guys. Please don't be very bookish in your approach, because everybody is bookish around you. So the more you are able to authenticate your own experience, the better it is. Can we include the point of migrant labor and urban waste in India? Absolutely yes. Absolutely yes. You have to talk about that. That you have the settlements in the fringes of the urban areas, in the floodplains of the rivers, and that is where the waste accumulation increases. Many of the times while answer writing, you also come across a conundrum where you have too many points that you have to write. You don't have enough time, you don't have enough space. So in that case, always advisable to go for a kind of a graphic approach. For example, integrated management. Let's suppose integrated waste management. Simply go for various aspects. Okay, that in itself not only reduces the time that you will consume to write and basically depict all the points that you have in your mind, it will be graphical also, it will be presentable also, and the evaluator will definitely take a look at this. As compared to a candidate who has written it in a paragraph manner, you will get more marks. So always use these tricks and tips in order to improve the return that you get from each of these marks. Migrants from Nepal, Burma, and Bangladesh could be discussed. No, no, not in this. They are not the problems of pollution as of today. We have enough number of migrants who move from one part of the country to other. So why to bring about these contentious issues? Now, then when we talk about the method of waste management, how do you manage the waste? So you have various different methodologies which are used. One is the open dump. When we talk about an open dump, so they are uncovered sites where solid waste of different types is dumped. It is left out in the open and is not separated. This is your open dump, right? This is the kind of an open dump. This is the kind of the garbage mountains that Delhi is well known for. And in fact, again, I tell it to all the students that I interact with. If ever you get an opportunity to stand on a high-rise building in Delhi, do that and witness the surroundings of Delhi. You'll find hill-like features around Delhi. Delhi does not have any hills. These are dumps and mounds of garbage, which have been accumulated over a period of many, many, many years. Right? So that is where you have these open dumps. Now, when you have these open dumps, the problem with these open dumps is that not only will it have lot of organic compounds, it is a kind of a commingled waste, isn't it? So it is a kind of a commingled waste. Yes, the one near Rohini also. Yes. The one near in the region around the vicinity of Ghaziabad also you have that. So you have Simapuri also you have that. So you have various different areas around Delhi. So this is basically when we talk about commingled waste. It is mixed together, right? So here, the organic waste which are present, the organic wastes, they start to decompose. Okay, and understand this because this was in significant amount of discussion this year when you had a kind of a waste dump in the region of Kochi which caught fire. And in waste dumps in Delhi also, they keep on catching fire during the summer season. So there were a lot of articles, editorial pieces written on the Hindu, which you would have covered in the current news, the CNA sessions. But still, you need to be aware of that. Yes, the Brahmapuram waste site. So here you have the organic waste. Organic waste undergoing decomposition. When the organic wastes undergo decomposition, they produce heat and gases like methane, hydrogen sulfide, etc. Now, these gases are flammable. Are flammable. Right. Now, in the presence of heat, and you have these flammable gases. Now, in this commingled waste, you also have the presence of materials with a lower combustion point where they can burn at lower temperatures also. For example, leaves, the dried leaves. For example, very thin plastics. They can burn very easily, right? So here, in these scenarios, materials such as cloth, then for example thin plastics, then for example if you even consider dried leaves, catch fire easily. Catch fire easily. Okay, so that is where you have large fire incidents happening in the region of open dumps. And when these open dumps they catch fire, understand, many of them many of the materials will burn because the heat produced is so high. It will be like a burning furnace. So many of the toxic materials will start burning. They will discharge some toxicants, some pollutants and contaminants, which then will pollute the ground. It will degrade the ground, it will degrade the land. And that is where you will find, for example, I don't know if you have ever happened to witness this. I sincerely hope you never get to witness this, because breathing in that region becomes absolutely impossible. But when you observe those blackish toxins which start getting discharged from there, now those blackish, like tar, they start settling on the larger ground area. Even after the entire material is burnt off, those toxins, they persist. Those toxins would have been included in various different waste material. It is only the combustion of those waste materials which discharges those toxins, and they have a long term reaction potential. So that is why open dumps are not the way to go. That is not always advisable, because please understand, when you have open dumps, this also gives rise to diseases. You will have various different, for example, vectors, various different mosquitoes, etc., which will sit on these open dumps, and that is where you will have the various different diseases which can be spread. So, what has been done by the various different municipalities is the fact, and this has been done for some time now, for many decades now. What they get into the habit of is they start building landfills. What is a landfill? Landfill, the literal meaning of that, you fill the land. So how can you fill the land? So basically, what is done around the cities is large ditches are dug. Very large ditches are dug. And then it is filled with all the various different kind of garbage. All the various different kind of garbage. Don't think about it as water, even though I've drawn it like water. But please understand, this is your waste and dump. And after that, the ideal process is you cover it with a very thin layer of soil. You cover it with a soil layer. So that is your landfill. But all the major cities in our country, they started running out of the land area where they could carry out this process long time back. Almost 2 decades back, the various different municipalities, they have run out of the land where they can do that landfill activity. For example, Mumbai, if you want to dump that garbage, where will you dump? If you dig a newer area, the entire builder mafia, the entire political class will come down so heavily upon you, you might be thrown in that garbage also. So you never know. In the region of Bangalore, same case. In the region of Hyderabad, same case. In the region of Chennai, the same case. In the region of Delhi, you don't have that land, right? So the problem with the landfill is that here, this is not very favorable, because again, as I told you earlier, this waste will impose significant amount of weight, a pressure onto the lower regions. So the lower waste, or the waste in general, they will start secreting chemicals or toxins, which eventually start seeping into the ground. The toxins seep into the ground. The ground. And that is when they can contaminate the groundwater, they can contaminate the soil underneath. The level of contamination is significant. So, in order to get rid of this problem, what can you do? Apply your logic. In order to get rid of the problem of seeping, what can you do? You can basically cover this up. You can basically provide a layering of cover here. You cover it, the base of it, with a kind of rock, or a kind of a clay like material which is not penetrable, which is not permeable, or a kind of a large biodegradable plastic sheet, etc. You provide that layering so that the toxins, they don't penetrate into the lower region. If you do that, that is what is referred to as a sanitary landfill. Observe this. You basically provide a layer of protection so that all the waste and the toxins released by the waste, they don't percolate into the lower regions of the soil. Okay. So here, if you take a look at it, a landfill is a site for the disposal of waste materials by burial and is one of the oldest form of waste treatment. Landfilling is done by for the following type of waste: commingled waste, mixture of waste which is not found suitable for the processing, pre-processing and post-processing rejects from the waste processing sites. For example, you have taken all the waste to the waste processing site, the disposal site. From there, you have recycled certain materials, you have burned certain materials to produce energy, but you will still have certain materials, certain, let's suppose, biodegradable materials, etc., which you cannot make use of. You can manufacture manure by that, but let's suppose you have some amount of waste that you cannot make use of. You throw it off. Non-hazardous waste which is not being processed or recycled. So here, adverse pedoclimatic conditions. Pedoclimatic refers to adverse soil conditions, the soil ecology. The soil condition also needs to be perfect, isn't it? In the landfill, the adverse pedoclimatic conditions in the landfill cover soil, such as gas problem, shallow soil, nutrient deficiency, elevated temperature, and leachate contamination. These are the various problems of the landfill, the issues associated with landfill. With landfill. Okay, the various issues and problems that you link with the landfill, where the soil in itself starts becoming infertile. There is a lot of heat which is produced, which will kill the microbes in the nearby area. Gases will be released. That is why many of the, earlier, around 3 to 4 decades back, you had a problem in majority of the urban areas of the world where you had these landfills being used, that so much amount of methane was produced and heat was produced, and then you cover it on top with soil. So the gases have no way to escape. That is where random explosions would happen and fire would take place. Wildfire events would happen, right? Burning of the regions around them. So, in order to get rid of these explosions, passageways or pipelines started being provided so that if the gas is produced, the gas at least will have an exit point rather than burning off in the same area and creating untoward explosion events. Okay? Pedoclimatic basically means the soil condition and the soil ecology here. Conditions of soil ecology. Of soil ecology. Okay? And leachate contamination is basically the contamination caused due to leaching. So this is the process where the toxins, they seep into the ground by the process of leaching. So it is the contamination which happens into the lower region. That is what is also the leachate contamination. So contamination due to leaching. Of toxins to lower layers. Okay. Now, after this, in order to get rid of that problem of leaching and contamination of the underground soil and underground region and underground water also, you have the sanitary landfills. So what do you do in the sanitary landfills? So they are more sanitary and are constructed in a methodological manner to eliminate the problem of leaching. That is, seepage of the contaminants and toxins to the lower level. So these are constructed on impermeable soil. Impermeable means impenetrable, where the toxins simply won't penetrate into the lower regions, and lined with impermeable materials such as plastic and clay. Major limitation of this material is the costly transportation to far away landfill sites. That is the only impediment, and also the construction, the coverage of the entirety of the portion with these kinds of sheets, that is also a kind of an impediment. So these are the impediments which are faced, but nonetheless, sanitary landfills are a much better option, much better solution as compared to simple landfills. Okay. MSW here refers to municipal solid waste. This is your municipal solid waste. So, under normal situations, you have the landfill, and in the landfill, you don't have these covering, do you? In the landfill, you don't have this covering. Particular covering is not there. So, you only have this which is present. Okay. And you have all the commingled waste which is there. In the case of sanitary landfill, you cover that with a kind of a impermeable layer, with the rocks that you place on the bottom, with the kind of a clay that you fix on the bottom so that it does not penetrate. Now, then you also have incineration plants, pyrolysis, and the aspect of bioremediation. When we say incineration, incineration is what? When you burn it off, right? Incineration is the process of burning garbage in massive furnaces at high temperature. Obviously, the emission that is released, you need to control, or you need to filter that out also. It is used to utilize energy, because let's suppose you have a lot of garbage, 5 tons, 50 tons. If you dispose it off, it might occupy an area of 100 square meter, 200 square meter. If you burn it off under controlled conditions where you are able to control the emission also, that 50 ton will reduce to maybe 2 tons or 1 ton. Disposing that burnt off material will become much easier, much comprehensible. So it is used to utilize energy or minimize landfill area with energy recovery. Okay. And the products formed in the combustion process, such as the gas, which consists of nitrogen, carbon dioxide, the waste gases, vapor, etc., they are then controlled and taken care of. Okay. Right. So this is where we'll restrict the discussion here today. I hope the discussion has been helpful. I hope the discussion has been productive. We meet again tomorrow. Tomorrow we have an extra session in the evening. We meet again tomorrow where we carry out this discussion further. Commodity trading in integrated commodity trading, for example, from the recycled materials. You have recycled, let's suppose, from the e-waste gold, silver. What do you do with that? You need a kind of a proper trading platform where you can sell them to the new producers. So that is the commodity trading platform. Can't we use garbage to generate electricity? Absolutely, yes. So that is where, when you utilize the energy here, what is that utilization of energy? So the heat that is produced in these massive furnaces, and after you burn it, again, massive amount of heat is produced. Now that heat is used to burn off water or convert water into vapor. That steam will be able to run the turbines and the generators. Yes, Shalu. I hope that this answers your question also. COP28, we will discuss, Gulam, next week. When by that point of time, the details of the loss and damage fund will also be much clearer. But already the COP28 has been marred by UAE's insistence to stick to the issue of crude oil. So that is where you won't be expecting a kind of a landmark deal, but then you never know. UAE has got a lot of money and a lot of influence also. Okay. And can wax be the covering material? No, because that is simply very easily biodegradable. The plastic waste management, we can predict that tier 1 cities can have some sustain to take care of the plastic. So for that, Aniket, you need the municipalities and the wards to have a financial health, right? If that is not happening, the plastic waste is going to be a persistent problem. Incineration plants, Harshita, they will cause pollution if you are not able to manage these waste gases or the flue. That is why you use industrial scrubbers or wet scrubbers, where a lot of filters are used, where you filter out the waste gases. The slide on the issues with landfill. Okay. These are the issues with landfill. Legal compliance is basically the emission standard which have been set by the various pollution control boards, agencies, etc., if that is being met by everybody or not. Any other use of waste except recycling of waste? Manufacturing of manures. The biodegradable waste can be used to manufacture manures. The plastics can be turned into small pellets, which can be recycled for another plastic manufacture. Sanitary landfill is still not sustainable as waste is not segregated and thus will not disappear just by covering. And incineration leads to release of toxic gases. Which one is a better option in coming times? Incineration, if you know how to manage the gases, is always a better solution. Tomorrow we'll study about bioremediation also, which can also be significantly helpful. Okay, we'll restrict the session here today. We will talk about it again tomorrow. We'll talk about the other ways in which you manage waste, the legislations. Take care of yourself. Goodbye. Have a good night. Thank you.